There is a moment in the second book of Avatar where a 12-year-old girl gets sealed inside a metal box, and instead of waiting to be rescued, she invents an entire branch of bending that the world has never seen before. She does not shout about it. She does not even seem that impressed with herself. She just touches the wall and feels that there is still earth inside it, tiny veins of it hiding inside the metal, and she pulls. And then she walks out. Almost nobody talks about that scene as the quiet moment when Avatar tells you what kind of show it actually is. Tonight, on Ember, we are going through all of it. Every moment, big and small, where Avatar, or one of the people inside it, simply outthinks you. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. You are welcome to drift off at any point, we will be here a while. The first smart thing Avatar ever does is refuse to explain itself. Most fantasy shows open with a map and a voice that tells you the history of the world before you have met anyone in it. Avatar does not do that. The first images you see are two siblings in a small boat on a freezing river trying to catch fish. The fish gets away. The brother complains. The sister soaks him with a wave of water she did not quite mean to bend. By the time those two have argued for 2 minutes, you have already learned, without being told, that this is a world where some people can move water with their hands, that some people cannot. That the ones who can are often dismissed by the ones who cannot, and that this is going to be a children's show willing to be funny about real annoyance between real siblings. You have learned the texture of the relationship between Katara and Sokka before you have learned either of their names properly. That is a choice. Most shows would have given you a scrolling prologue. Avatar gives you a wet brother. The choice keeps paying off. For a long stretch of the first book, the show withholds the big nouns. It does not march out and announce that the Fire Nation committed a genocide against the air nomads. It lets you walk through the wreckage with Aang, lets you see the bones in the temple, lets you watch a boy who does not yet understand that he is the only one of his kind realize it in pieces, and then it sits with the silence of that realization for longer than a kid's cartoon is supposed to. The exposition happens inside Aang's face. You learn what the war is by watching what the war has already done. The same is true for almost every piece of world building the show ever introduces. The Avatar cycle gets explained as Aang learns it. The 4 nations get differentiated by how the air smells in the places the group visits. The history of the Fire Nation is built up over dozens of small encounters with prison guards and noodle vendors and refugees and old men playing pai sho, until you eventually realize you have a working model of an entire empire in your head, and nobody ever sat you down to lecture you on it. This is also why the cabbage merchant is, despite appearances, a piece of careful writing. He is a recurring joke. His cart gets destroyed in town after town because Aang and the others crash through whatever marketplace they are passing through. The first few times it is a sight gag, the kind a children's show uses to make the small viewers laugh. But the merchant keeps showing up. He is in the Earth Kingdom. He is in Ba Sing Se. He turns up in places the story has no reason to put him, and each time, he is doing the same boring, ordinary thing. He is selling vegetables, and every time he loses a cart, he is telling you something the show would otherwise have to find a way to say out loud. He is telling you that this is a world where people sell vegetables in carts, that towns have markets, that commerce continues even in wartime, that the war is not everywhere at the same intensity, that ordinary life persists, that civilians have routines that get casually destroyed by the heroes of someone else's adventure, that the scale of the world is human. A worse show would have had a herald announce the size of the Earth Kingdom. Avatar has a man yell about his cabbages, and somehow that gives you a deeper sense of how big the place is than any map could. You can feel the same intelligence in the way the show handles language and writing. The script on the walls in the background of almost every shot is not gibberish, it is real Chinese, drawn by a real calligrapher, often spelling out the names of the people in the scene or the place you are looking at. Most of the audience never reads any of it. The show puts it there anyway. The fight choreography is built on real martial arts traditions, with each bending style mapped to a different discipline, so that when you watch a waterbender move, your body recognizes the rhythm of Tai Chi, even if you have no vocabulary for what you are recognizing. And when you watch a firebender, you feel the snap of a different art entirely. None of this is announced. It is just there, doing its work quietly. While a different show would shout at you about how rich its lore is, the smartest world building in Avatar is the world building that does not call itself world building. There is also the trust the show shows in its own audience. In an era of children's television that was terrified of plot, that reset every episode and made sure the youngest viewer could miss a week without losing anything, Avatar chose to be serialized. Things accumulate, characters change. People you met 2 seasons ago come back as people who have lived through 2 seasons, not the same people in different shirts. A line dropped offhandedly in Book 1 gets paid off in Book 3. Information you were given casually in a comedic episode becomes load-bearing in a serious one. The show keeps quiet faith that you are paying attention, and it rewards you for it. What that adds up to is the first and most important smart moment in Avatar. It is not a single scene, it is the decision, made before the first frame was animated, to treat the audience as if it could grow with the story. To let the children watching feel respected, and to let the adults watching feel that someone had finally written something with the same care as the better books on their shelves. Everything else we will talk about tonight, every clever moment of strategy, every quiet line of dialogue that turns out to be the key to everything, every villain whose plan is too well thought through, all of it grows from that first decision. The show is smart because it assumes you are too. With that established, the rest of the night becomes easier to follow. We are going to walk through the moments where the show, or somebody inside the show, did something that on rewatch reveals itself to have been thought about more deeply than the surface suggested. We will start with the person who is, in many ways, the brain of the gang, even though the show keeps letting other people steal the credit. We will start with Sokka. Sokka is one of those characters who works because the show is patient enough to set him up wrong on purpose. When you meet him, he is loud and a little ridiculous, a teenager left in charge of a village of children and elderly women, because every other man in the Southern Water Tribe has gone off to fight a war that has lasted longer than he has been alive. He carries a club and a boomerang. He wears war paint that he has clearly designed himself. He talks about the warrior's instinct in a voice that suggests he has never actually been in a real fight. He gets knocked over by penguins. The show invites you to laugh at him. It is doing this on purpose, because it wants you to underestimate him, because everyone inside the show is going to underestimate him too. And because the moment when you stop underestimating him is one of the moments the show is most pleased to deliver. Sokka does not bend. In a world where the powerful people throw fire and water and rock at each other, that is a permanent disadvantage that no amount of training can erase. The show is honest about how this weighs on him. There is a quiet thread that runs through every book of the series where Sokka is forced to find some other way to be useful, because the body he was born into does not get to do the magic. And what he finds, slowly, almost by accident, is that he is clever. Not in the way that a wizard in a fantasy novel is clever. In the way that a real engineer is clever. The way somebody who actually has to figure out where the supplies will come from and how the boat will get over the mountain is clever. He looks at a battlefield and sees the choke points. He looks at a hostage situation and sees what the hostage taker needs and how to give them just enough of it to get the hostage back. He looks at a piece of machinery and instinctively understands how it would break. The first time you really notice this is small. It is the boomerang. He throws it, he catches it, it is a joke at first. But the show keeps quietly demonstrating that he is actually good with it, that he uses it as a piece of leverage in fights he should not survive, that he has thought about how to use it as more than a weapon. Then he picks up a sword, and the show gives him an entire episode about studying with a sword master, and that episode treats him with absolute seriousness. It is not played for laughs. The master treats him as a worthy student. He earns the sword. From that point on, the boy with the boomerang is also a swordsman, and the show has quietly turned the comic relief into one of the most capable physical fighters on the team, without ever stopping to brag about it. But the sword work is not the deepest thing about Sokka. The deepest thing about him is that he is the only person in the group who plans. Aang reacts, Katara argues, Toph charges, Zuko, when he eventually joins them, broods. Sokka makes plans. He sits with a map and works out how many days the journey will take, how much food they need, where they can resupply, what they will do if it rains. He notices when somebody's lie does not match the lie they told earlier. He notices when the geography of a town does not match what a local just told them about it. He is the one who, when the group is in real trouble, will say, "Give me a minute, let me think," and then will come back with something that has at least 3 steps to it and at least 1 fallback if the first step goes wrong. There is a long stretch of the second book where the group is essentially being kept alive by his ability to do logistics, and the show is quietly aware of this, and quietly rewards him for it, even as the louder characters get the bigger applause moments. The sharpest thing he ever does, though, is not a fight, it is a meeting. It is the moment when, late in the show, The group has to bring information about the Fire Nation's plans to the leaders of the invasion force, and Sokka is the one who stands in front of a room of grown men, generals and warriors and his own father, and has to deliver a briefing on the eclipse, on the layout of the capital, on the timing of the attack. He stutters at first. He nearly falls apart, and then he gathers himself, and he does it. He gives the briefing. He answers their questions. He proposes the structure of the attack, the order of advance, the contingencies if the Fire Nation reacts faster than expected. The men in the room listen. They listen because what he is saying is right, and because he has earned the right to be the one saying it, by being the only one who actually did the work to know it. That moment is the show paying off seasons of slow setup. The boy who was knocked over by penguins is the boy designing the invasion of the most powerful military on the planet, and the show makes you feel the weight of how far that is to travel. The smart thing the show does with Sokka, finally, is that it never pretends he became a different person. The Sokka who runs the war room is the same Sokka who got soaked by his sister in the first scene. The arc is not a transformation. It is a revelation. The capacity was always there. The world just needed to slow down long enough to let him show it. By the time the show ends, you understand that the Avatar might be the chosen one, but the war was always going to be won by the kind of person who makes lists. Aang is harder to read as a smart character, because the show keeps him soft on the surface. He giggles, he plays, he rides bison and otter penguins and air scooters. He breaks the tension in serious scenes by doing something childish. For a long time, the obvious reading is that the brain of the group lives in Sokka, the muscle lives in Toph, the heart lives in Katara, and Aang is the spirit, the chosen one, the magical thing that holds them all together. The show invites that reading on purpose, because it wants you to be surprised, eventually, by how carefully Aang thinks. The most important thinking Aang does is moral, and the show takes that kind of thinking seriously, the way most adventure stories do not. The central question of the back half of the series, the question that sits underneath every fight and every conversation, is the question of what to do about Ozai. The Fire Lord is the villain. He has done unforgivable things. He intends to do worse. Every other avatar in the lineage, when asked by Aang for advice, gives him essentially the same answer. They tell him that as the avatar, his job is to bring balance, and that bringing balance, in this case, requires killing Ozai. The voices of his past lives are unanimous. Roku tells him, Kyoshi tells him, Kuruk tells him, Yang Chen, an air nomad like him, the one he most expects to give him a way out, tells him in the most direct terms of all, that the needs of the world come before the spiritual needs of any one avatar. A worse show would have Aang accept this. A worse show would have the chosen one shoulder the cost, kill the villain, and learn a sad lesson about how heroism requires sacrifice. Avatar refuses to do that. Aang listens to 4 of his own past lives tell him that he must kill, and he says no. He does not say no out of cowardice. He says no out of a moral intelligence that the show has been quietly building in him from the first episode. He was raised by monks who taught him that all life is sacred. He cannot believe that his identity as an air nomad and his identity as the Avatar are in fundamental conflict. He believes there must be a third option, even though no one around him can think of what it could be, and he is willing to put the fate of the world on the bet that the third option exists. That is one of the cleverest moves in the entire show, and it is clever in a way that is easy to miss, because it does not look like cleverness. It looks like stubbornness. The cleverness is in the fact that Aang is the only person in the whole story who is willing to question the framing of the problem. Everybody else, including his own past lives, accepts that the choice is kill or be killed, that the choice is the world or my soul. Aang looks at that choice and says, "This is the wrong question. There has to be a way to win without becoming the thing I am fighting." And then the show vindicates him, because the third option does exist. The lion turtle comes. Energybending is given to him. Ozai is not killed but is unbended, stripped of his fire, left alive and powerless. The balance is restored without the murder. The show is aware that this resolution is controversial. There is a long-running argument among fans, perfectly reasonable on both sides, about whether energybending is a satisfying solution or a deus ex machina, whether Aang earned the third path, or whether the writers simply produced one because they could not bring themselves to make the chosen one a killer. Both readings have weight. What is undeniable, though, is that the show built the case for this resolution very carefully, and that the case rests on Aang's intelligence as a moral thinker. He spends entire episodes wrestling with the question. He talks to his past lives, he meditates, he consults with the people he trusts, he goes off alone, he comes back. He does not arrive at his answer by accident. He arrives at it by sustained, painful thought, and the show treats that thought as labor, as work, as something heroic in its own right. Most cartoons would not have given a 12-year-old that much philosophical weight to carry. Avatar trusted him with it. The same kind of intelligence shows up in the smaller decisions Aang makes throughout the series. The ones that look like temperament but are actually thought. The first time you see it in full operation is, of all places, in a swamp. The group ends up in a strange, waterlogged forest in the Earth Kingdom, and Aang has a vision that turns out to be a vision of Toph. He has no idea who she is, only that she is somehow the answer to the next stage of his training. He could ignore the vision, he could push the group on towards the next obvious destination. He chooses, instead, to follow the strange feeling, to trust that the world is trying to tell him something. That choice ends up bringing the most important new member into the group. The smart thing is not the vision. The smart thing is the willingness to take the vision seriously when nobody else around him wants to. You see the same instinct in the way he handles being the avatar in front of strangers. Aang is famous, in the world of the show, in the way a saint is famous. People bow when they see him. People weep. People want him to fix their towns, to heal their sick, to bless their crops. He could lean into that. The show occasionally lets you see what it would look like if he did, in episodes where he is briefly worshipped or fawned over. He does not enjoy it. He deflects it. There is a real intelligence in his refusal to use the title as power. He understands, in a way most people in the show do not, that the avatar is supposed to bring balance, not impose a will. The title is a responsibility, not a permission. Most 12-year-olds, given that kind of authority, would use it. Aang spends most of the series trying not to. The hardest moment of moral intelligence in the show, though, the one that I think most often gets undersold, is the conversation Aang has with himself about Katara. The series has been gently pointing towards a romance between them for a long time, but it does so in a way that lets you feel Aang's own awareness of how much he is asking of her. There is a moment near the end where he has to choose between his attachment to her and the spiritual concentration that the avatar state requires. The monks, in his memory, are very clear about this. To be the avatar fully, he is told, he must let go of his earthly attachments. He must release her. He nearly does. He sits with the question for an entire episode, and the show takes the question seriously, treats it as a real cost, lets him grieve it. And then, when the moment comes, the resolution is not that he stops loving her. The resolution is that he refuses to choose between the love and the duty, that he insists, again, that the framing of the question is wrong. He is not going to be a worse avatar for loving someone. The monks, much as he respects them, were wrong about this one thing. That is the same intelligence at work as the one that refused to kill Ozai. It is the intelligence of someone who will not accept that the world's binaries are real. Avatar likes to set up binaries because binaries are how stories build tension. Aang's particular gift is that he keeps refusing them. He refuses to choose between his people and his duty. He refuses to choose between his pacifism and his power. He refuses to choose between love and detachment. He keeps insisting that the third option exists, and the show keeps rewarding him for that insistence. By the end, the moral of the series, if you can call it a moral, is something like, the smartest thing you can do in an impossible situation is to refuse the impossibility, and to keep thinking until you find a way through. The other clever thing Aang does, which is easy to miss because it looks like an accident, is the way he uses his bending. Most viewers, including most fans, remember Aang as a powerhouse, somebody whose avatar state can level mountains, somebody who fights with the full strength of all four elements. But in his ordinary, non-avatar state fighting, he is one of the most consistently non-lethal fighters in the show. He pushes, he blows, he moves the ground, he almost never strikes to kill. He uses earth to lift opponents up and out of the way, rather than to crush them. He uses fire, when he uses it at all, with extreme caution, partly because of an early lesson where he hurt Katara by being reckless with it. The show makes a point of letting his bending reflect his ethics. Other characters strike to defeat. Aang strikes to defuse. A close watch on his fight choreography will show you that he is essentially playing a different sport from everyone else on the field, even when they are theoretically fighting the same fight. By the end of the series, what you have, if you look back across all of it, is a portrait of an intelligence the show worked very hard to disguise. Aang is presented as a child, as a goof, as the heart of the team. He is all of those things. He is also, quietly, one of the most rigorous moral thinkers the show ever puts on the screen. The brightest moment of his arc is not a fight he wins. It is the long, careful refusal to let the world decide for him what kind of person the chosen one has to be. If Aang's smartest moments are moral, then Azula's are tactical, and to watch the two of them across the same series is to watch two different kinds of intelligence in the same room. Azula is, by some distance, the cleverest villain Avatar ever produces. Ozai is more powerful. Zhao is more impulsive. Long Feng is more politically embedded. None of them are, in the cold strategic sense, as dangerous as Azula. The show makes a point, again and again, of letting you see her think, and what you see when she thinks is somebody who has been trained from infancy to model other people's behavior and use it against them. You first see her as a kind of perfect product. She is a teenage prodigy who can produce blue fire, which the show quietly tells you, by the way it shades the flame, is a sign of an unusual control over heat. She can generate lightning at will, something only a small number of firebenders in the entire show can do, and the ones who can are typically much older and much more experienced. She fights with the precision of a fencer. She is composed in a way her brother Zuko is not. The moment that establishes her, the moment when the show says, "This is who you are dealing with now," is small and unsettling. It is a scene of her with her father, and you watch the way she has learned to perform for him, the way she has learned to listen for what he wants to hear, the way she has learned to be the kind of daughter who never disappoints. The first thing the show tells you about Azula is that she has read her father like a book. Everything else flows from that. What makes her dangerous in the field is that she reads everyone else like a book too. She does not just fight people, she studies them. When she chases Aang's group across the Earth Kingdom, she does not chase blindly. She listens to villagers, she follows rumors, she works out where the group will go next based on what she knows about who they are. When she captures Aang's friends, she does not bother to threaten them with violence first. She skips straight to the threat that will actually move the people in the room, because she has already worked out what each of them is afraid of losing. She is not just a firebender, she is essentially an interrogator with a flame attached. The most decisive single thing Azula ever does is also her cruelest. It is what she does in Ba Sing Se. The Earth Kingdom capital is, when she arrives, the safest city in the world. It has stood against the Fire Nation for a century. Its walls are impossible to breach by any direct military assault. The Avatar has come to the city looking for protection. The Earth King has finally been told the truth about the war. Everything is, in narrative terms, lined up for the heroes to win the second book and finish the war. And then Azula, with two friends and no army at all, walks in and takes the city. How she does it is the part worth slowing down on. She does not breach the wall. She does not fight her way in. She arrives in disguise, as a member of the Kyoshi warriors, having defeated the Kyoshi warriors in a separate operation and stolen their identity. She uses that disguise to get into the royal palace. Once inside, she does not assassinate the Earth King. She does not start a fire. She does something much more dangerous. She finds the most powerful man in the city and turns him. Long Feng, the leader of the Dai Li, the secret police that have been quietly running the city while the Earth King was kept ignorant, thinks that he is using her. He thinks he can borrow her menace, point her at his enemies, and dispose of her when he is done. She lets him think that, for as long as it serves her, and then, in a single scene that ranks among the most quietly chilling in the entire show, she turns the table on him. She convinces the Dai Li that they have backed the wrong horse. She does this not with threats, but with a kind of grim seduction of their professional pride, suggesting to them that they have spent their lives serving a small man, and that they would be more interesting agents if they served her instead. They follow her. Long Feng watches it happen and cannot stop it. The most powerful covert force in the Earth Kingdom changes hands without a single drop of blood being spilled. What she does next is the part the writers must have planned years in advance, because it pays off so many setups at once. She takes the city. She has the Dai Li seize the entrance to the underground city beneath the palace. She uses them to ambush the Avatar's group, separating them, hurting them, and then, in the chamber at the bottom of the city, she does the thing that the show needed someone to do for it, to feel like the world might actually lose this war. She shoots Aang in the back with lightning while he is in the Avatar state. The Avatar state is supposed to be the trump card. The show has been showing you, for 2 seasons, that when Aang enters it, he becomes effectively unkillable, a vessel for all the power of every avatar before him. Azula's lightning hits him in mid-transformation, in the precise instant when the cycle is most vulnerable. She has, by some combination of intuition and observation, worked out the one moment when the chosen one can actually be killed, and she has timed her strike to hit it exactly. The avatar cycle nearly ends in that chamber. Katara saves him, just barely, but the show insists on letting you sit with the fact that this could have been the end of the entire mythological line. If that were the only piece of brilliance Azula displayed, it would already make her one of the more dangerous villains in animated television. But the show is interested in another, harder kind of intelligence too, and that one shows up in the way Azula handles power once she has it. She does not gloat at length, she does not waste time on petty revenge. When she returns to the Fire Nation as a conqueror, she does not boast. She lets the news of her victory do the work for her. She turns down a celebration. She maintains, in front of the court, the air of a daughter who has merely done her duty. She knows that her power inside the Fire Nation depends on a very specific reading of her father's mood, and she manages that reading with the same care that a courtier in a real royal court would have to manage a real king. She is, in those scenes, a young woman doing politics, and doing it better than anyone else in the room. Her victory at Ba Sing Se gives her an opening, and she uses the opening to do something a less intelligent person would have considered beneath her. She lets her brother Zuko receive the credit for the victory. She knows that if anything goes wrong with the strike on the Avatar, if the Avatar turns out to have survived, the credit can be transferred into blame, and the person who carries that blame will not be her. Zuko, in his desperation for his father's approval, walks straight into that trap. By the time he realizes what she has done, she has effectively reset his exile, on her terms, with no fingerprints of her own anywhere on the operation. That is the cleverness of a small empire builder. It is not impressive in the way that breathing lightning is impressive. It is impressive in the way that real, frightening political people are impressive. The show is honest about how rare this is. Most teenage characters in most adventure shows are presented as either heroic or stupid. The genuinely manipulative teenager is harder to write, partly because writers are afraid to make a child look like a monster. Avatar is not afraid. It lets Azula be exactly the kind of person she would have to be, and then it asks you to feel, alongside her cruelty, that she is a product of her upbringing. She was trained to be this. She was rewarded, every day of her life, for being good at being frightening. The reading the show eventually pushes you towards is the one where you understand her cleverness as a survival mechanism, where you see that she is intelligent the way an animal that has been beaten its whole life is intelligent. She reads the room because the room has always been dangerous. That is also why her breakdown lands as hard as it does. The show could have left her as a flat villain. It could have let her stay sharp and let Aang defeat her, and let that be the resolution. Instead, in the back half of the third book, it shows you what happens when the strategy stops working. When her father takes the throne of the Phoenix King and leaves her behind to rule the Fire Nation in his place, she is given exactly the prize she has been training for her entire life. And the show is precise about the way receiving the prize destroys her. She has been so good at managing other people's expectations that when she is finally placed in a position where there is nobody left to manage, her mind comes apart at the seams. The intelligence, freed from any object to point itself at, turns on her. She starts to imagine her mother in the mirror. She accuses her closest servants of treason for the smallest provocations. By the time of the comet, she is alone in the palace, and the brilliance that took Ba Sing Se has nowhere to go but inwards. The Final Agni Kai is a fight against somebody who is no longer entirely in the room. The reason this matters, in a tour of the smartest moments in Avatar, is that the show is making an argument about what intelligence is for. Azula's intelligence is real. It is not faked. It is among the sharpest the show ever puts on screen. But the show insists, by the way it ends her arc, that intelligence in the service of a sick environment cannot stay healthy. Without somebody to read, without somebody to manipulate, without somebody to outthink, an intelligence trained for those purposes will eat itself. The contrast with Sokka, who turns his cleverness into logistics and loyalty, or with Iroh, who turns his into teaching, is one the show wants you to feel. Azula is brilliant in a way that has no soft places to land. By the end, the brilliance has nowhere to live. It is worth noting, for the sake of honesty, that some fans read this differently. Some read Azula's collapse as the show's one major character failure, an unfair punishment for a girl who never asked to be raised the way she was, a way of cleaning her off the board, so that the writers did not have to handle a redemption arc as difficult as Zuko's. The comics, which are a separate canon from the show, have spent years exploring whether she can be brought back from the edge, and the answer there is messy and incomplete. Inside the show itself, though, the picture the writers leave you with is clear enough. The sharpest villain in the series ends the series broken, and the show wants you to feel sorry for her without letting you off the hook for fearing her first. If Azula is the show's portrait of intelligence in the service of cruelty, then Iroh is the show's portrait of intelligence in the service of patience. The two of them are mirrors of one another, which is part of why the show keeps using them as the poles of the Fire Nation royal family. They are both extraordinarily smart. They are both, when they need to be, capable of extraordinary violence. They both spent decades inside the same court, watching the same men, learning the same lessons. The difference is what they did with the learning. Iroh's intelligence is the kind that you only really notice on the second or third viewing of the show, because the first time through, he is mostly playing the role of comic relief. He drinks too much tea. He gets distracted by gardens. He loses at Pai Sho on purpose. He misplaces his shoes. He embarrasses Zuko constantly. For long stretches of the first season, he is the soft, round shape inside every Fire Nation scene, the man you sometimes wonder why the show keeps insisting on. And then, somewhere in the middle of the first book, the show starts to let him drop the act in small moments, and you begin to understand that almost everything he has been doing has been a kind of slow, deliberate teaching, aimed at one specific student. The student, of course, is Zuko. Iroh's whole second life, after the death of his son Lu Ten and the loss of the war he had been fighting at Ba Sing Se, has been organized around the question of what to do about his nephew. Zuko has been raised by Ozai, and the show is careful to let you see what that has cost. Zuko's face is permanently marked by the scar his father gave him. His sense of himself is bent around the need to win back the approval of a man who never actually loved him. He believes that he is broken because his father told him he was broken, and he believes that the only path back to wholeness is to capture the Avatar and present him to the throne. Iroh, who is older than the war, who has seen this script play out in his own family before, knows that this path leads only to a deeper version of the same wound. He cannot tell Zuko this directly. Zuko would not hear it. So Iroh sets about teaching him the only way an intelligent uncle can teach a wounded nephew, which is by being present, by being kind, by repeating, in 1,000 small ways, the message that there are other ways to live. The teaching method itself is one of the smartest things in the show. Iroh almost never lectures. He instead offers proverbs that sound like nothing the first time you hear them, and turn out to have been load-bearing the second time. He asks questions that Zuko brushes off. He cooks meals that Zuko does not appreciate. He tells stories about Ba Sing Se, about his son, about the man he used to be, that Zuko, in his rage, dismisses as old man rambling. Iroh accepts the dismissal. He does not insist on being understood. He plants the seeds and waits. The show, over 4 seasons of careful pacing, lets you watch those seeds work their way through Zuko's mind, until, somewhere in the 3rd book, the things Iroh said to him on the deck of a ship years earlier start coming back to him in his own voice. The teacher's smartest move was patience. The teacher knew that the lesson would take years and might not be received in his own lifetime, and he taught it anyway. The most striking demonstration of Iroh's intelligence as a teacher, though, is the lightning lesson. He is the one who, in the 2nd book, sits Zuko down and explains the technique of redirecting lightning. He has invented this technique, he explains, in a sequence of dialogue that doubles as one of the show's quiet showpieces, that he developed it by studying the waterbenders, by watching the way they move force through themselves without taking the brunt of it, by importing a method from another discipline into his own. That is, in itself, a remarkable thing to say out loud inside the world of the show. The Fire Nation has been teaching, for centuries, that the 4 elements are separate, that they are at war, that to learn from another nation is a kind of weakness. Iroh quietly tells Zuko that the opposite is true. He says, "The people who really understand the elements understand that they all draw from each other, and that the best firebenders are the ones who have been humble enough to learn from waterbenders, from earthbenders, from airbenders." Inside a single conversation, he undoes one of the foundational lies of the Fire Nation's curriculum. That is the moment where you realize that Iroh is not just a kind uncle. He is a one-man counter-education program. He has been quietly putting cracks in the wall of the Fire Nation's worldview for years, doing it in private, in low voices, to whoever will listen. The lightning lesson is the version of this you get to watch happen on screen. There are dozens of other versions you have to infer from the way other characters talk about him later. Paku, the waterbending master, treats him with deep respect when they finally meet, because the two of them have been corresponding, in some way, through the secret society that the show only properly reveals later. Piendao, the swordsman, similarly knows him. Bumi, the Mad King of Omashu, knows him. There is, the show is hinting, a whole hidden network of teachers who have been talking to each other across the borders, swapping notes, keeping a candle lit in a war that has been trying for a century to put it out. Iroh is one of the principal members of that network. The most decisive single thing Iroh does, in the course of the actual show, is harder to point to, because it happens off-screen. It is the breaking of the wall of his own prison cell in Ba Sing Se, when, having been captured by Azula and held in the bowels of the city, he simply, casually, on a day of his choosing, walks out. He has been pretending, for the length of his imprisonment, to be the broken old man his captors expected to see. He has been eating their food, accepting their humiliations, behaving like a defeated dragon. And then, on the day of the comet, he gets up, levels his cell with a single burst of fire that he has clearly been husbanding for exactly this moment, and walks out of the prison as if he had simply forgotten an appointment. He is, in the months that follow, the one who personally retakes Ba Sing Se from the Fire Nation occupation. He does this not with an army, but with the White Lotus, the network we just touched on. The most decisive military operation of the third book is led, off-screen, by a kind old man who has been pretending to be confused. What I find most striking, though, is what he refuses to do. He could, in the aftermath, have taken the Earth Kingdom throne for himself. He has the moral authority, he has the relationships, he has the personal force. Nobody would have stopped him. The show is precise about the fact that he does not even consider it. He returns Ba Sing Se to its people. He goes back to his tea shop. He waits for his nephew to come find him. The intelligence the show is describing here, in those final scenes, is not a strategic intelligence. It is a kind of wisdom that comes from having already tried the other thing. Iroh, when he was a younger man, did want to take a throne. He did march on Ba Sing Se the first time. He did it for the reasons people do those things: ambition and grief and a desire to prove himself. And what he learned, when his son died at the gates of the city, was that the cost was not worth what the throne would have bought. The Iroh who walks out of the prison on the day of the comet has spent 20 years sitting with that lesson. The cleverness you are watching is the cleverness of somebody who has been taught the deepest lesson a war can teach, which is that you cannot, in the end, conquer your way to happiness, and that everyone who tries discovers it too late. The show makes this point especially clear in a single quiet episode, often cited by fans as the best half-hour of television the series produced, in which the action stops entirely and we spend the whole runtime inside Iroh's perspective on a single day in Ba Sing Se. He goes to the market. He helps a child whose hat got stuck in a tree. He teaches a young man not to commit a robbery by recognizing that the young man's anger is the same anger he has seen in his nephew and his own former self. He spends an evening, the anniversary of his son's death, alone on a hill, with a small altar and a song. The song is sung by the voice actor who actually performed Iroh, which gives the moment a layer of weight outside the world of the show. Mako Iwamatsu, the actor, died not long before that episode aired, and the song, in retrospect, sits as both an in-story memorial and a real one. The show is doing two pieces of mourning at once. The episode is, on a story level, almost nothing happens. There is no fight, there is no lore reveal, there is no plot advance, and yet it is one of the most quietly remembered hours of animation in the medium, because of what it shows you about how an intelligent man, who has lost everything, decides to keep being kind anyway. That, the show is arguing, is the highest form of intelligence available to a human being. Not the cleverness that wins a fight, not the cleverness that takes a city, the cleverness that, faced with a lifetime of pain and a world that gives you every reason to become cold, chooses to keep being warm. Iroh is, by the end of the show, the proof that this kind of intelligence exists. The other thing to note about Iroh before we move on is the way the show uses him to bridge two separate canons. The series itself ends with him in Ba Sing Se, the tea shop reopened, the war over, the nephew returned. The sequel show, Legend of Korra, decades later, treats him as a figure from the spirit world, somebody Aang's successor encounters in the spirit plane and consults for advice. Inside the original Avatar canon, this is a quiet, beautiful continuation. Inside Korra, the show does not explain in detail how Iroh got there, only that he has chosen, in the afterlife, to keep doing the same job. He is, in death as in life, a teacher who is willing to wait for the right student to walk into his shop. Some details about exactly how this works inside the spirit world are a Korra invention rather than something the original series ever spelled out. If you want to hold the canon separately, you can read his retirement to the tea shop as the end of his story. The show leaves room for both readings. Either way, the man you remember is the same man. The sharpest character on the screen, by the end, was the one who was always asking if you wanted some tea. Toph arrives in the show as a problem the writers had carefully prepared. Aang needs an earthbending master. The story has set up that earthbending is essentially the opposite of airbending in temperament, which means that whoever teaches him will have to break him of some very deep habits. The expected pick, the one a less interesting show would have used, would be a wise old earthbender, somebody with gray hair and a gravelly voice, who would guide him through a few episodes of disciplined training. What the show actually gives him is a small, blind, 12-year-old girl who has been sneaking out of her aristocratic compound at night to fight in underground earthbending rings under the name the Blind Bandit, and who is, by some distance, the best earthbender of her generation. The foundation Toph stands on is that her blindness is not a disability the show wants you to feel sorry for. It is a different way of perceiving the world. She has taught herself to feel vibrations in the earth through the soles of her feet, and over time, she has refined this sense to such a degree that she can build a complete picture of her surroundings from it. She can tell, by the gait of a heartbeat through the ground, how big a person is, how tall, how heavy, how nervous. She can tell, by the way somebody shifts their weight, whether they are about to lie or about to swing. She walks into a room and reads it the way a sighted person reads a face. The show is consistent about this from the moment she appears. She is not a sighted person with a workaround. She is somebody who has built a richer perception of the world than the people around her, and the source of that perception is the part of her body the world keeps writing off. The implication, which the show does not belabor but does insist on, is that earthbending suits her precisely because she experiences the world the way the earth experiences it. She does not look at a fight. She listens to it through the ground. She does not aim. She lets the earth tell her where the opponent is. The mechanics of her bending are simply an extension of the way she has been living since she was old enough to walk. The show, by writing her this way, makes a small but important argument about what it means to be good at something. It is not just talent, it is the willingness to build from the inside out a different relationship with the world than the one your culture has handed to you. Toph is good because she has been allowed to be different. Everyone who tried to make her be normal made her worse. The most famous of her smart moments, the one that the entire fan base agrees is one of the best scenes the show ever produced, is the invention of metalbending. She is captured by a small group of bounty hunters and shut inside a metal box. By every traditional rule of earthbending, the cage should hold her. The whole reason metal has been used to imprison earthbenders for centuries is that it has been pulled and refined from raw earth into something that earthbenders cannot move. There is, when she is locked up, no precedent in the world of the show for a single earthbender to escape from a metal box. By most accounts of the show's lore, until Toph, in that single afternoon, it was considered impossible. What she does, sitting alone in the dark, is what intelligent people always do when they have run out of other options. She thinks about the problem from the other end. She does not ask herself, how do I bend metal? She asks herself, what is metal? The answer she works out, by feeling the wall of her cage with her toes, is that metal is not a separate substance from earth. It is earth that has been refined, processed, hammered, but at the core, it is still made of the same minerals that the rest of the rock she has been bending her whole life is made of. The smelting process has not destroyed those minerals. It has only made them harder to find. If you can feel them, the small impurities that the process did not quite manage to remove, you can grab them. And if you can grab the impurities, you can move the metal around them, because metal is not solid in the way it looks. It is a fine matrix of stuff that includes the earth elements she has been pulling on since she could walk. She tests the theory in her cell. She bends her toes against the wall. She feels the tiny veins. She pulls. The metal moves. The cage opens. The show does not score this moment with a triumphant orchestral cue. It lets it happen quietly, as if she is simply doing something obvious that nobody else had bothered to check. And then, having opened the cage, she walks out and takes the bounty hunters apart with the same casual competence she takes everything apart with. The smartness of the scene is that it is internally consistent with everything she has been doing all season. She has always been the one who pays attention to what the Earth is actually made of, rather than what people have been told the Earth is made of. Metalbending is just the largest case of that attention. The show treats this as a revolutionary moment in the world's history, and the comics and Legend of Korra both honor this by treating metalbending as a discipline that exists, after Toph, in a way it did not before her. She is, inside the world of the show, the person who reopens an entire field of bending that the Fire Nation's metallurgy was supposed to have closed forever. Beyond that single famous scene, Toph is the show's quiet specialist in epistemic intelligence, by which I mean she is the character who is best at telling when other people are lying. She functions as a human lie detector throughout the back half of the series. Her seismic sense includes the ability to feel a person's heartbeat, and the show treats this with the precision of an old radio drama detective. When somebody claims to be one thing while their heart says another, Toph hears the discrepancy. She does not announce it. She files it. She uses it later. The first time she catches somebody this way, the show plays it for laughs. The second time, it is a clue that breaks the case. The third time, it is the thing that saves a friend's life. By the end of her arc, you understand that Toph's seismic sense is not just a superpower. It is a way of refusing to be lied to. That refusal is also a way of refusing to be soft. Toph is, of all the gang, the one most willing to call out the others when they are being dishonest with themselves. She is the one who tells Katara that her motherly act is, in fact, a way of avoiding her own grief. She is the one who tells Aang that he is being precious about his pacifism in a way that risks getting other people killed. She is the one who tells Sokka, in a small scene that fans have written about for years, that his constant joking is a defense mechanism against the fact that he does not bend and never will. The show lets her say these things because the show is honest enough to know that families need at least one person who will not flinch from saying the obvious. Toph's smartness in those conversations is not strategic. It is moral clarity dressed up as bluntness. She sees what is happening and refuses to pretend otherwise. The other piece of her intelligence that the show develops over time, and that pays off most directly in Legend of Korra, is her instinct for institutions. By the time we see her again in the sequel show, she has built and run the world's first metal-bending police force, the city guards of the new capital. She has helped invent, in the decades between the two shows, a profession that did not exist before her, a kind of urban policing that uses metal bending to hold a city together. The morality of this, inside the world of Korra, is complicated. The metal-bending police are, like any police force, sometimes good and sometimes not, and the writers of the sequel show are honest about that. What matters here is what it tells you about Toph. Inside the world of the original show, she is a wild girl who runs away from her parents. By the time of Korra, she has built one of the most important civic institutions in the world. The show does not spell out the steps between those 2 points, but you can imagine them. She would have used the same skill set the entire way. She would have been the person who refused to take the official answer about how a city should be organized, and who, by her own willingness to look at the underlying material instead, would have built something nobody else thought possible. The most consistent thing about Toph is that she keeps doing the same trick at larger and larger scales. She looks at the world, refuses to accept that it is what people say it is, feels for the veins of earth that nobody else bothered to notice, and pulls. Katara's intelligence is the hardest of the 4 to write about, because the show keeps quietly redirecting your attention away from it. She is, structurally, the heart of the team. She is the one who cries. She is the one who hugs Aang. She is the one who tells Sokka to behave. She is the maternal figure that the gang accretes around. Because she does this job so well, the show can sneak past you the fact that she is also one of the most rigorously curious students of bending in the entire series, and that some of the most consequential changes to the world's understanding of waterbending happen because she keeps refusing to stop asking questions. The first thing to notice is that she is, when the show starts, not actually trained. She is the only waterbender left in the entire Southern Water Tribe, because the Fire Nation, in a deliberate campaign over decades, hunted down every other waterbender they could find and either killed them or imprisoned them. The southern style of waterbending, the version that her people would have taught her, has been almost entirely destroyed by the time she is born. What she knows, she has learned in private, by trial and error, from a few scraps of memory and her own experiments. By the rules of the world, she should not be very good. Most bending traditions take decades of formal training. She has had none of it. What she does in the first book is, in retrospect, a quietly heroic act of self-education. She practices on whatever water she can find. She gets it wrong. She gets it wrong again. She does it again. The show is honest about how often early Katara loses fights, fails to control her bending, ends up drenching herself rather than her opponent. She is not, when you meet her, a natural prodigy in the way Aang or Toph are. She is a hard worker who has spent her whole life in a place where there was nobody to teach her. And then, when she finally arrives at the Northern Water Tribe and meets a master who could finally help her, the show makes a point of letting you watch her run into the next obstacle. Master Pakku, the only waterbending master she can find, refuses to teach her because she is a girl. The Northern tradition reserves combat bending for men. Women are trained only as healers. The smart thing Katara does in that moment is also a small moment of moral intelligence that fans sometimes underrate. She does not accept the local custom. She also does not simply refuse to be a healer. She does both at once. She insists on combat training. She fights Pakku in front of the whole tribe. She earns the respect that opens the door to formal teaching. And in parallel, she becomes one of the most powerful healers in the world by accepting the other half of the tradition that her culture has tried to lock her out of. By the time she leaves the Northern Water Tribe, she has effectively reunified the two halves of waterbending that the Northern tradition has been keeping separate. She is, by the end of the first book, both a combat bender and a healer, in a way that no character of her age has ever been allowed to be. She has refused to choose between the things her culture wanted to assign her on the basis of her gender, and she has done it without giving up either side. This is one of the most quietly important arcs in the entire show, and it pays off in two specific moments in the back half. The first is the introduction of bloodbending, in an episode I want to be careful about, because the show treats it with the gravity it deserves. The group, in the Fire Nation, stays at the cottage of an old waterbender named Hama, a woman who had been imprisoned by the Fire Nation decades earlier and who has, in her years of captivity, developed a technique nobody else has ever discovered. Bloodbending is the manipulation of the water inside another living body. It is, the show is careful to point out, a thing only possible during the full moon, when waterbenders are at their strongest. It is also, ethically, the most disturbing application of bending the show ever shows you, because it converts another person into a puppet. Hama uses it to terrorize the village around her, an act of slow revenge against the Fire Nation civilians who, in her mind, share the guilt of the soldiers who imprisoned her. What the show does with Katara in that episode is the part that takes my breath away every time. She figures the technique out by watching Hama use it. She does not need a manual. She does not need years of training. She watches the woman who invented bloodbending do it once, in the dark, and she immediately understands the mechanism. She is forced to use it, in the climax of the episode, to save her brother and Aang from being puppeted by Hama. She does it. She bloodbends another human being. And then, in one of the saddest moments in the show, she sits with the knowledge that she now knows how. The skill cannot be unlearned. She is now, for the rest of her life, one of the small number of waterbenders in the world capable of doing this thing, and the responsibility of carrying that capability is permanent. The intelligence at play here is twofold. There is the cognitive intelligence of working out the technique by inference, which is a real piece of bending genius the show usually only gives to Toph. There is also the moral intelligence of recognizing that the technique, once known, cannot be safely lost, and that the only thing she can do is refuse, almost completely, to ever use it again. The follow-up episode, much later, where she is given a chance to bloodbend the soldier who killed her mother, is one of the show's hardest pieces of writing. She is at the edge. She has the rein to work with. She has the man in front of her, defenseless. She has every justification a story would normally use to let a hero kill. And she does not do it, not because the man does not deserve it, but because she understands, in a way the show forces her to articulate, that the cost of carrying the act would change her permanently, and that she is not willing to be the kind of person who lets that change happen. She walks away. She lets him live. Some viewers find this resolution unsatisfying. The show argues, very deliberately, that the resolution is the only one she could have made and still remained herself. It is a smart moment because it is honest about the cost of intelligence. Knowing how to bloodbend is, in a real sense, worse than not knowing. The smartest thing she does, having learned, is not to use it. Beyond bloodbending, Katara is the show's leading example of a character who keeps quietly upgrading her bending throughout the series. By the end of the first book, she is a beginner. By the end of the second book, she is a master. By the end of the third book, she is, in many fans' rankings, the most flexible and dangerous waterbender on screen, capable of healing wounds that other characters consider unhealable, capable of fighting full Fire Nation troops single-handedly, capable of pulling water from the air in places where there is no obvious source. She does this not by being a prodigy in the way Azula is, but by being a relentless student of her own discipline. She learns from Pakku, she learns from Hama, she learns by watching Aang, who is faster than her, and by working out how to do what he does inside a more disciplined frame. She is, in the very specific sense that good athletes are intelligent, an extraordinarily intelligent fighter. Her smartness is not strategic in the Sokka sense. It is the smartness of constant improvement, of the willingness to be a student forever, of the refusal to settle into one technique. There is one more piece of Katara's intelligence that the show plays quietly, and that deserves a minute of attention, because it is easy to miss. She is, when she sets her mind to it, one of the most effective propagandists in the show. The episode about the Painted Lady, where she disguises herself as a river spirit in order to feed and protect a village the Fire Nation has been poisoning, is, on the surface, an episode about her kindness. It is also, on a more careful reading, an episode about her understanding of how myth and rumor work, of how a village can be motivated to defend itself if it believes a higher power is on its side, of how a story is sometimes a more effective intervention than any direct help could be. She invents a piece of folklore in a single afternoon and uses it to save a village. The story she invents persists after she leaves. The villagers, by the end of the episode, are organized, fed, and aware that they can protect themselves. The Painted Lady is, in a real sense, Katara's prototype for a kind of soft power that the show otherwise tends to associate with characters like Azula or Iroh. The fact that she chooses to use that power for ordinary kindness instead of conquest is the moral resolution. The fact that she has the power to use is the quiet flex. By the end of the show, Katara is one of the most consequential characters in the world. By the time of Korra, she is, alongside Toph, the oldest living survivor of the original gang, a master healer who has trained successive generations of healers, and the person to whom the Avatar's children come for advice. The smartness was not always in the foreground, it was almost always in the background. But it was, from the very beginning, doing the work of holding everything together. The show is not subtle about saying so, it just trusts you to notice. The Day of Black Sun is one of those events the show treats with two different kinds of intelligence at once. There is the intelligence of the plan itself, which is built over the course of the third book by Sokka and the Water Tribe and the Earth Kingdom Resistance and a handful of other allies, and which is, on its own merits, one of the most carefully thought-out pieces of military fiction in any animated show. And then there is the second, harder intelligence of the show itself, which knows from the moment the plan is being made that the plan will fail, and that the failure will be more useful to the story than any success could have been. The plan on paper is beautiful. The Water Tribe and the Earth Kingdom Resistance have realized that there is going to be, in the sky over the Fire Nation, an eclipse of the sun on a specific day. The eclipse will be brief. During its duration, firebenders, who draw their power from the sun, will lose access to their bending entirely. Every flamethrower soldier, every blue-eyed prodigy, every general, every member of the royal family will, for those few minutes, be ordinary humans with ordinary bodies. The Fire Nation has, in this gap, no power that the rest of the world cannot match. If you can deliver a strike force to the capital at the right moment, you can take the seat of the empire while it cannot bend. The work that goes into this plan is the part the show wants you to notice. It is not a flash of inspiration. It is months of organizing. Allies from across the Earth Kingdom and the Water Tribes have to be quietly recruited, fed, hidden, moved. Equipment has to be built. Submarines, designed by the Mechanist and his son, have to be tested and crewed. The Fire Nation's coastal defenses have to be studied. A specific landing site has to be picked. The Royal Plaza, the palace itself, the bunker the Fire Lord is expected to retreat to, all of it has to be mapped from the limited information the Resistance can gather. Sokka is the one who, as we have already seen, ends up doing the briefing on the eve of the invasion, and his briefing is delivered to a room of men who have spent years organizing this attack alongside him. The plan is, in every visible respect, the work of a real general staff trying to win a real war. And then it fails. Not because the plan was bad. The plan was almost the best possible plan. It fails because the show has been quietly setting up, for an entire season, that the Fire Nation has been one step ahead of the Resistance the whole time. Azula knows about the invasion. The Fire Nation has known about it for months, by most accounts pieced together from the show, through intelligence work that captured the Resistance's plans long before the day arrived. When the invasion force lands, the Fire Lord is not on his throne. He is in the bunker, with Azula, waiting. The Resistance fights its way to the throne and finds an empty room. They fight their way through the city to the bunker. By the time they break in, the eclipse is ending. By the time Aang stands in front of the Fire Lord, his bending is back and the invasion is over. The smart thing the show does with this is twofold. First, it lets the plan be genuinely smart. It does not make Sokka and the Resistance look stupid. The plan was the right plan. The Fire Nation simply outflanked it by being intelligent in a longer timescale. The lesson is that strategic intelligence does not exist in isolation. You can be the cleverest person in the room and lose to somebody who has been preparing for centuries. The Fire Nation has been at war for 100 years. The institutional memory of that war is in everything they do. The Resistance, by comparison, is improvising. The fact that they got as close as they did is, in retrospect, an achievement. The fact that they did not win was not their fault. Second, and this is the part that makes the failure structurally smart, the show is using the failure to set up two other things. The first is Zuko's defection. The day of Black Sun is the day Zuko finally walks out of the palace and joins the heroes. He does not do this until the failure has happened, until he has stood in front of his father during the eclipse and said the things he could not say while firebending was available, until he has explicitly rejected the version of himself his father had been trying to build. The invasion is the cover that makes his defection possible. If the invasion had succeeded, Zuko would never have had the chance to make that speech. The plan had to fail in order for the most important conversation in the show to take place. The second thing the failure sets up is the long, slow walk of the third book to its real ending. If the invasion had worked, the season would have ended in its middle, and the show would have had to invent a new conflict for the back half. Because the invasion fails, the back half of the third book becomes a story about an exhausted, defeated group of children who have to regroup, recruit Zuko, learn what they did not know, find the secret techniques the world has been hiding from them, and build a quieter, more personal version of the same plan that does not depend on the eclipse. The eclipse was the loud version. What comes after is the silent version. The show needed the loud one to fail in order to get to the silent one. There is a subplot inside the Day of Black Sun that deserves slowing down on, because it is one of the most thoughtful pieces of writing in the show. Sokka, during the eclipse, is in the bunker with the rest of the invasion force, and his father, Hakoda, gets injured. The injury is real, the blood is real, the bandages take time. Sokka has to choose, in the chaos, between staying with his wounded father and pressing the attack. He is the one who has been making the plans, the one who has been holding the operation together, and now the operation is collapsing, and his father is bleeding, and he has to make a series of decisions in real time about what matters most. The smart thing, by every textbook of military intelligence, would be to leave the wounded behind and press the attack. The plan depended on speed. Sokka does not do this. He stays with his father, and then he organizes the retreat, and the show treats this as a moment of intelligence rather than a moment of failure. He has learned, by the end of the eclipse, that no strategic objective is worth the people he loves, that the plans he builds have to include the survival of his own. Iroh would have recognized the lesson immediately. Azula would not. There is a smaller, often overlooked moment from the same day that deserves recognition, which is the moment when the Mechanist's son, Teo, and his fellow gliders take to the air during the invasion. They are not bending, they are just teenagers on hang gliders, dropping smoke bombs and harassing the Fire Nation defenses from the sky. The Mechanist has spent years building this kind of equipment, And the show is careful to let you see, in the planning sequences and in the invasion itself, that the resistance is winning whatever ground it wins, partly because somebody, somewhere, decided that the disabled boy in the wheelchair, who could not walk, could, with the right invention, fly. The fact that the invasion fails does not erase that. The fact that civilians on hang gliders fought firebenders in the sky over the Fire Nation capital is, by itself, one of the show's best statements about what intelligence as a civic project can do. The Mechanist did not bend, his son did not bend, they contributed anyway. The fact that the Eclipse plan failed does not unmake the fact that the people building submarines and gliders for the Resistance were, on that day, doing the most heroic thinking they had ever done. If you want a single line that captures what the Day of Black Sun is doing as a piece of writing, it would be this. The eclipse is the moment the show tells you, openly, that the heroes will not win by being smarter than the Fire Nation. The Fire Nation is smart too. The Fire Nation has been smart for 100 years. The heroes will win, if they win at all, by being something else as well as smart. They will win by being more honest, by being more willing to change, by being more able to hold their own pain without becoming it. The Day of Black Sun is the moment the show closes the door on the strategic, gun-against-gun reading of the war, and opens the door to the longer, harder reading, where Zuko has to defect, and Aang has to find a third option, and Iroh has to walk out of his cell. The most ambitious plan in the show fails on purpose, because the show has a bigger plan, and the bigger plan was never going to fit inside an eclipse. There is one more piece of context worth including. As far as fans have pieced together, much of the planning of the Eclipse invasion came from the alliance between the Water Tribe and the various Earth Kingdom resistance cells that had been operating quietly throughout the war. The invasion was not a single nation's project. It was a coalition. The show, by structuring the invasion this way, is making one more quiet argument about intelligence. The smart move was for the people of the Water Tribe and the people of the Earth Kingdom, two cultures who barely interacted before the war, to recognize that their survival depended on cooperation. The Fire Nation's strategy, for 100 years, had been to keep the other nations isolated from each other. The Day of Black Sun is the first time, in 100 years, that the strategy fails. Even though the invasion itself does not succeed, the alliance it produces does. By the time Sozin's Comet arrives, the resistance is not the Water Tribe and the Earth Kingdom separately. It is a single, coordinated movement, with allies in the Fire Nation, including former generals and princes, that the original Sozin would never have been able to imagine. The technique of redirecting lightning is, on its surface, a piece of magic. A firebender catches an incoming bolt with one hand, draws it across the body and out the other hand, and sends it back. It is a flashy move. It looks, the first time you see it, like the kind of thing a shonen anime would invent to give a character a cool finisher. What makes it one of the smartest things in Avatar is what it actually is once you let the show explain it to you. It is an act of comparative bending, an act of theft, and an act of mercy, all at once. It is, in many ways, the single clearest example of the show's argument about what intelligence in a culture is for. To understand why it matters, you have to start with where lightning sits inside the Fire Nation's understanding of itself. Lightning, in the show, is the rarest and most prestigious form of firebending. It is generated by separating the elements of fire, which the show treats as a kind of spiritual discipline as much as a physical one, and producing what amounts to a focused, cold burst of energy. Only a small number of firebenders in the entire series can do it. Ozai can, Azula can, Iroh can, a few others. The technique is taught only inside the Imperial family and a handful of trusted elite. It is, by design, an instrument of power that the throne reserves to itself, because the throne understands that whoever can throw lightning has, by definition, an advantage over every other firebender on the field. Now consider what Iroh did. He was a member of that elite. He had learned the technique inside the royal house. He knew, as well as anyone alive, how it worked, what it cost, what it could do. He could have kept the knowledge to himself. He could have, like every other royal firebender, treated it as a closed asset that belonged to the family. Instead, he sat on a ship in exile with his nephew, who had been thrown out of the same family, and he said, "I have invented something new. I have been watching the waterbenders. I have been studying the way they receive force without absorbing it. I think I can use that principle inside fire. I want to teach you." The fact that the inventor of the technique is willing to teach it openly to a teenager whose loyalty to the throne is, at the moment, an open question, is itself a quiet act of rebellion. Iroh is, in that conversation, telling Zuko that the things the royal family has been hoarding belong, properly, to anyone who can be trusted with them. He is saying that the firebending tradition, by isolating itself, has been making itself worse. He is saying that the most original technique in firebending is one he could not have invented without learning from the people his own nation has been at war with for 100 years. The teaching scene is, in a real sense, the dissolution of one of the foundational lies of the Fire Nation's culture, performed in a single afternoon by an old man and a confused boy on a ship. The technique itself is also a piece of physical intelligence worth dwelling on. Iroh describes it in terms borrowed from waterbending, the idea that you do not stop a force, you direct it. He explains that the body has, in his model, paths along which energy can flow, and that the trick is to let the lightning enter at one place, travel through a path that does not cross the heart, and exit at another place, all without trying to absorb it. The danger, he is careful to warn, is that any mistake in the routing will kill you. The lightning is not, in this model, something you tame. It is something you negotiate with. You build a corridor inside yourself and you ask the lightning to take that corridor instead of the one it would otherwise take. The show's animation, when it eventually shows somebody doing this on screen, is precise about the geometry. The energy enters the hand, it crosses the abdomen. It does not, you can see, cross the chest. It exits the other hand. The bender survives. That is, by itself, a piece of biological intelligence I find delightful. The show is, without making a fuss about it, articulating a small theory of the human body. The chest is dangerous because the heart is there. The chest is the place lightning would otherwise prefer to cross, because it is the most conductive route. To redirect, you have to go around it. The bender who can do this has had to learn enough about their own internal anatomy to design a path that does not pass through the most fragile organ they carry. The show treats this as a high-level martial arts technique, and it absolutely is one, but it is also, quietly, a piece of self-knowledge. You cannot redirect lightning without first knowing yourself well enough to know where, inside your own body, the bolt should not be allowed to go. This is the foundation, but the most consequential moment with the technique is what is done with it later, by the people who have been taught. There are essentially 3 on-screen demonstrations of lightning redirection in the original series. The first is Iroh demonstrating it on the ship, in calm conditions, for training purposes. The second is Aang, who has learned about the technique from Iroh, using it in a moment of necessity that I will not spoil here, but that demonstrates that the technique, like metalbending, is not actually restricted to firebenders. Once the principle is understood, a sufficiently disciplined bender of any element can apply it, because the principle is about the bender's body, not about the bender's element. The third, and the one that matters most, is Zuko using it in the Final Agni Kai against his sister. That final use is the part the show has been quietly building towards for 2 seasons. Zuko, in the final fight, is matched against Azula, the prodigy who has been the better firebender his entire life. He cannot, in a straight fight, beat her. He knows it. She knows it. The audience knows it. The only edge he has is the technique Iroh taught him, the technique she does not know, because Iroh refused to teach it inside the palace, and Iroh was the one who could have done so. In that single asymmetry, the show is reaping a setup that started in the first book. Iroh, by being the kind of teacher who teaches the people who deserve it, instead of the people who are positionally next in line, has changed the outcome of the entire war. Azula, who was the better daughter, did not learn it. Zuko, who was the worse son but the better student, did. When the lightning comes for him in the final fight, he is ready to receive it. When it comes for her, she would have been too. The show is not subtle about the moral. There is, in addition, the moment in the same fight when Azula, knowing she has lost the conventional contest, fires lightning at Katara instead. Zuko, who has been redirecting his sister's blue fire for the whole battle, throws himself in front of the bolt without time to perform the technique properly. He catches it. He almost dies. The show is careful to let you see that the redirection, attempted in a hurry, does not work cleanly. The lightning crosses paths it should not have crossed. He survives, but barely. The smart thing the show is showing you here is that the technique is not, even after years of study, a guarantee. It is a piece of self-knowledge that gives you a chance. The bender's character still has to do most of the work. Zuko's character, in that moment, is the part of the technique that nobody could have taught him. He chose to step in front of the bolt for somebody he loved. The teacher gave him the corridor inside his body. He brought the willingness to walk through it. It is worth spending a minute, before we move on the broader idea this technique encodes, because the show keeps returning to it. The Fire Nation, the show argues, has been at war with itself for 100 years. Its bending tradition, its culture, its educational system have all been organized around the assumption that purity is strength, that the Fire Nation is best when it is most itself, that contamination by the other elements, the other cultures, the other ways of seeing, makes a firebender worse. Iroh's technique is the show's most direct refutation of this. Iroh's technique is a piece of waterbending wisdom performed by a firebender on a current of fire. The whole point of it is that the Fire Nation's idea of purity was a lie. The best technique the Empire ever produced was invented by listening to the people it was trying to destroy. Every time somebody on screen uses lightning redirection, they are, whether they realize it or not, repeating a small argument for an open, curious, comparative way of thinking about the world. The show does not say this in any speech. It just lets the technique exist, on screen, in the hands of the people who deserve it most, and it lets you draw your own conclusions. There is a smaller, much quieter thing the show does with lightning that also deserves credit, which is the way it treats Mai and Ty Lee. Neither of them are lightning users. Mai uses thrown blades. Ty Lee uses a technique called chi blocking, which lets her temporarily disable a bender's ability to bend by striking specific pressure points on their body. Chi blocking is the third great example, alongside metalbending and lightning redirection, of the show's argument that there is always a way to upset the apparent hierarchy of power. A non-bender, with the right training, can disable a bender. The show treats this as a piece of practical, achievable intelligence rather than as a piece of magic. Ty Lee has spent her life studying anatomy. She knows where the body is vulnerable. She does not need to bend, because she has outstudied the people who do. The show, by including a character like her in Azula's entourage, is reminding you that the smartest path through the world is not necessarily the one that the world tells you to take. It is the one you can build for yourself by paying attention. The Mechanist is one of those minor characters who, when you go back and watch the show in order, you realize has been quietly carrying more of the argument than the screen time would suggest. He is introduced in the first book, when the gang stops at the Northern Air Temple and finds it occupied. Not by air nomads who, as we have already discussed, are essentially gone, but by a community of refugees who have spent years rebuilding the temple as a kind of mountaintop engineering colony. The Mechanist is the man who built the colony. He is an inventor, not a bender. He has, by his own ingenuity, taken the most sacred structure of an extinct culture and turned it into a workshop. Aang, when he arrives, is furious. The argument that follows is one of the most quietly important pieces of moral writing in the show. Aang sees the temple, sees the modifications the Mechanist has made, sees the smoke and the gears and the pulleys cutting through the murals on the walls, and he understands, in a single look, that the place his people once lived has been turned into something his people would never have built. The Mechanist, who is by every measure a kind man, does not initially understand why this is a problem. He has been keeping the building standing. He has been preserving what he could. He has, in his view, been honoring the temple by living in it. He does not see, until Aang explains, that the temple was sacred in itself, that the building was not just a building, that the murals were not just decoration. The conversation could easily have ended in a fight. The show chooses to end it in a compromise. The Mechanist agrees to restore the parts of the temple that can be restored. Aang agrees to let the colony stay. Both of them learn something from the conversation that they did not know before they had it. That whole episode is one of the smartest pieces of cultural negotiation in any children's show. It is, in miniature, a way of asking a hard question about heritage, occupation, and renewal, and refusing the easy answers from either side. The Mechanist is not a villain. He has been keeping the lights on in a place that would otherwise have collapsed. Aang is not unreasonable. He has been mourning a people who were killed for being themselves. The show lets both of those things be true, and lets the resolution involve real work on both sides. By the end of the episode, the Mechanist and his son have become allies. The relationship matters later, especially when the Resistance needs submarines and gliders. But the cleverness of the moment is not the practical alliance. It is the conversation itself, the willingness of the show to slow down and let two reasonable people work out a disagreement about what a place is for. The Mechanist himself is also, in his own quiet way, the show's clearest portrait of an intelligence that is not bending. He cannot move stone or water, he cannot throw fire. What he can do is design. He invents, on-screen, balloons, gliders, a working submarine, a battery of small mechanical weapons. He invents, off-screen, who knows what else. The show is careful to let you see that his inventions are not always good. He sells, in the first book, designs to the Fire Nation because their patronage is keeping the colony fed. The episode does not let him off the hook for this. He has, in his pragmatism, contributed to the very war the protagonists are trying to end. Aang confronts him. He admits the wrong. He agrees to stop. From that point on, for the rest of the series, he is one of the most useful allies the Resistance has, because his inventions, redirected to the right side, are decisive. The portrait the show is drawing here is the portrait of a kind of intelligence that does not get celebrated nearly enough in adventure stories. The Mechanist is what we would now call a systems thinker. He builds things. He understands that things can be repurposed. He understands that materials are neutral and that the morality is in the design. He is, in many ways, the spiritual cousin of Sokka, and the show has Sokka spend a lot of time with him and his son for exactly that reason. The two of them, when they are in the same room, speak a language nobody else in the cast really speaks. They talk about leverage. They talk about pulley ratios. They talk about cargo capacity. Sokka, who has had nobody to talk to about these things, lights up around them. The show is showing you that there is a community of mind that exists across the world, made up of people who think this way, and that this community has been doing more to keep civilization going than the bending elite usually credits. The Mechanist's son, Teo, is the second part of this argument. Teo cannot walk. His chair is part of the apparatus. The Mechanist has, over years, designed a wheelchair and then a glider that lets his son fly. The decision the show makes here is a small but important one. Teo is not, in this story, the disabled child who needs to be cured by some bending magic. He is the disabled child who, through his father's inventions and his own competence, becomes one of the most reliable airborne fighters in the Resistance. The show does not need to fix his legs to make him heroic. It gives him a glider and lets him fight. This is, in a quiet way, one of the show's most generous pieces of writing, because it refuses the easy narrative that there is something about Teo that needs to be different. He is already enough. The world has to build him the tools that match him, and once it does, he is exactly as capable as anybody else. The show's larger argument, across all of this, is that the smart move in any society is to widen the definition of useful. The Fire Nation, by trying to keep all the power inside bending, has been wasting most of its population. The Resistance, by including the Mechanist and Teo, and the Kyoshi warriors and the Chi blockers and the Swordmasters, and 100 others, has been doing the opposite. It has been treating intelligence and capacity as something to be found in every kind of body and every kind of mind. By the time the comet arrives, the Resistance is operating on a much wider base of human talent than the Fire Nation is. That is not an accident. The show is making the argument, episode by episode, that this is the smarter way to organize a civilization. There is one more thing the Mechanist does that deserves credit, because the show treats it as a small grace note rather than a big set piece. When the colony at the Northern Air Temple is overrun by the Fire Nation, the inventors decide, in a single afternoon, to fight back with what they have. They use their workshop as a fortress. They build improvised weapons. They repurpose their gliders into combat platforms. And when the time comes, they evacuate. They do not, in the end, hold the temple. They lose it. They escape. They live to design another day. The smart thing about that episode is that the show treats the loss as a victory. The Mechanist, in defeat, has demonstrated that the Resistance can move fast, can fight smart, can take losses without breaking. He is, in that sense, the example for what the rest of the war effort eventually becomes. He is the proof that you do not need to win every battle to be winning the war. You just need to keep thinking, keep building, keep moving the people who matter to a place from which they can think again tomorrow. What strikes me most about this part of the show, when I rewatch it, is how willing it is to spend time on a character who, in any standard adventure story, would be a footnote. The Mechanist is never the focus of an episode the way Aang is. He never bends. He never delivers the big monologue. He is, by every conventional metric, a side character. And yet the show keeps cutting back to him, keeps using him to make its quiet arguments, keeps treating him as if he were as important to the war effort as any of the named bending masters. That is one of those decisions that, once you notice it, you realize the show was making about a lot of its characters all along. The smartness of Avatar is not just in the front of the frame. It is in the corners, in the recurring extras, in the people you only meet for a few minutes who turn out to have been doing important work the whole time you were not watching. The Boiling Rock is the show's heist episode, and like the best heist stories, the cleverness of it is layered, with the plan you watch failing, and the plan inside the plan succeeding, and a third improvised plan getting them all out of the building when the second one cracks. It is 2 episodes long, broken into a part 1 and a part 2, and it sits late in the third book, at a moment when the gang has just suffered the loss of the Day of Black Sun, and is trying to find some way to make the back half of the season feel like progress instead of grief. Sokka and Zuko, both of whom have unfinished business inside the Fire Nation, decide to break into the most secure prison in the Empire and break out the people they have left behind. It is, by every standard of practical sense, an insane decision. The fact that it works is one of the most satisfying pieces of storytelling the show ever produces. The Boiling Rock itself is, the show is careful to establish, a maximum security facility built on an island in the middle of a boiling lake at the center of a volcanic crater. Even if you escape your cell, you are still inside a building made of metal, on an island made of stone, surrounded by water hot enough to cook you, with no boats, no birds, and no way off. The original architects of the prison were thinking about firebenders. The whole structure has been designed so that a firebender, even at full strength, cannot escape, because there is nothing flammable, nothing to burn, no way to use heat against the heat the prison already has. The smartness of the design is, in itself, a piece of background world building the show deserves credit for. Even before our heroes arrive, the prison is one of the most thoughtful pieces of military architecture the show ever sketches. What makes the heist intelligent is that Sokka and Zuko do not, at any point, try to overpower the building. They know they cannot. Instead, they walk in as guards. Zuko, who knows the Fire Nation uniform and the protocols, can pass without being checked. Sokka can, with the right disguise, pass too. They infiltrate the facility on foot, locate the people they are looking for, and then have to invent, on the spot, a way out of a place that has been designed so that there is no way out. The first plan they come up with is a balloon, of the kind the Mechanist would build, made from materials inside the prison's own workshops. The plan, on paper, is brilliant. The plan falls apart the moment the prison goes into lockdown. What I find smart about the writing of these episodes is the way it lets the plan fail in 3 separate ways, in sequence, each of which forces the characters to think faster. The balloon plan fails because Suki, Sokka's girlfriend, who turns out to be inside the prison and has been since her capture during the second book, alerts the team that the plan has been compromised. The second plan, which involves disguising Suki as a member of the prison staff and rerouting their escape through the cooler, fails because the prison's most senior guard sees through the disguise. The third plan, which involves the timing of a planned prisoner riot, fails because the riot does not break out at the scheduled time. By the time the team is ready to escape, every plan they have come up with has failed. They are out of plans. The smart thing they do next is the part to credit. Sokka, in particular in this stretch, becomes a kind of pure improviser. He recognizes, in a way the previous Sokka would not have, that the right move is to use the failure itself as the cover. The riot has not happened. Fine. He will start the riot. The senior guard is in the way. Fine. He will have Suki ride him like a horse off the gondola line above the boiling lake. The gondola is the only way off the island, and Azula, who has arrived to personally supervise the recapture of the escapees, has it shut down. Fine. He will have somebody cut the cable so that the gondola crashes into the side of the cliff and they have to climb. Every one of these decisions is a kind of cheerful, exhausted intelligence that knows that the original plan has stopped mattering and that the only way through is to keep being 1/2 step ahead of the people chasing them. The most resonant, clever moment of the heist, though, is not strategic. It is personal. Zuko, while inside the prison, has been quietly searching for somebody specific, and the show is careful, in the structure of the 2 episodes, to keep his side mission slightly off camera. He is not just there to help Sokka. He is there because he has, for the first time in the show, a chance to free his father's prisoner, his sister's prisoner, the man who has spent the last year on the wrong side of the Empire's bars, and that man is Sokka's father. When Zuko encounters Hakoda for the first time, the scene is held in a long, careful beat. Hakoda has every reason to hate him. Zuko, until recently, was hunting Hakoda's son. The fact that the two of them now have to escape together is the kind of irony that a worse show would have written for laughs. Avatar plays it as something almost reverent. Hakoda, who is one of the kindest characters in the show, accepts Zuko's help without theater. He does it because he can see, by the way Zuko carries himself, that the boy in front of him has done the work to deserve to be trusted. That moment, in which a father chooses to extend trust to the son of his enemy, is one of the show's most quietly intelligent pieces of writing. It is the kind of trust that, in the real world, holds nations together at the end of a war. The heist also gives us the show's most concentrated portrait of the warden, as a recognizable, almost comically tactical figure. He runs the prison the way a real prison warden runs a real prison. He has lists, he has procedures, he runs counts, he knows before the alarm is sounded that something is wrong, because his routines tell him so. He is, in his own way, an intelligent man, and the show takes a small pleasure in letting Sokka and Zuko outwit him, exactly because he is competent. There is no satisfaction in tricking a stupid guard. The boiling rock works because the warden is good at his job and they have to be better. The show, by giving the antagonist real competence, makes the hero's cleverness matter. There is, finally, the smartness of what the heist costs them. Suki gets out. Hakoda gets out. Chitsang, a prisoner they free along the way, gets out. The balloon they fly home on is the same kind of balloon the Mechanist could have built, and the show lets you feel that the Resistance, having survived the failure of the Eclipse, now has a new operational pattern. They are not going to win this war with a single massive strike. They are going to win it by extracting their people, one prison at a time, by patching up the alliance, by being clever in small theaters until they can be clever in a big one. The Boiling Rock is the show's quiet rehearsal of the strategy the back half of the season is actually going to follow. It is the show telling you, by the way Sokka grins at the end of it, that the heroes have stopped trying to fight the war the Fire Nation wants them to fight, and have started fighting their own. There is also, in the middle of these two episodes, one of the most underrated scenes in the entire series. A scene where Mai, who has been brought to the prison by Azula, confronts Zuko about his earlier decision to leave the Fire Nation without telling her. Mai is not a hero, not yet. She is angry. She has every right to be. The scene is not large. They talk for a few minutes. Zuko, who has been growing slowly, does not try to defend himself. He acknowledges the hurt. He tries to explain. She listens. And then, when the chase is on and Mai has the chance to either help Azula recapture Zuko or to interfere with the operation, she chooses Zuko. The show plays this as a romantic decision, which it is, but it is also a piece of moral intelligence on Mai's part. She has watched Azula for years. She has decided, after seeing Zuko's reasons and weighing them against Azula's, that the regime she has been serving is not the one she wants to serve. Her defection is, in its own quiet way, one of the cleverest things any character in the Fire Nation does in the show. It is what makes the larger defection of Ty Lee possible too, because the moment Mai betrays Azula, Ty Lee takes a half step in the same direction and disables her, and the entire inner circle of the Fire Nation princess collapses in a single hallway, because two friends finally decided they had had enough. That, the show is arguing, is what intelligence in a totalitarian state has to look like in practice. It is not a single grand rebellion. It is a series of small refusals, made by people who have been watching the regime up close, made at the moments when the cost of refusing has finally crept under the cost of complying. The Boiling Rock is a heist about prison gates, but it is also a heist about loyalty, and the most clear-sighted people in it are the ones who understand that the highest walls in the prison are not the literal ones. The Final Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula is one of the most carefully composed sequences in the show, and it rewards close attention. The duel is, on the surface, a fight between siblings. Underneath, it is a fight between two readings of the same upbringing. Zuko has spent the show unlearning what their father taught them. Azula has spent the show perfecting it. By the time they are facing each other in the courtyard, with the comet burning red overhead, the question of who wins is not really a question of who is the better firebender. Azula is the better firebender. The question is, which of them has built a wider mind on top of their bending? And the show, in a series of small choices, is going to give the answer to Zuko by inches. Set the scene. Sozin's comet has returned, the celestial event that gave Sozin the power to begin the war 100 years earlier. and during its passage, every firebender on the planet is amplified by a degree that the show has been hinting at for 2 seasons. Ozai is using the comet to launch a campaign to burn the Earth Kingdom. Azula has been given the Fire Nation throne. Aang is, at this moment, halfway across the world facing Ozai personally. Zuko and Katara have decided to take the capital. The Agni Kai is, on its surface, the format. It is a ritual fire duel, the traditional form for a Fire Nation succession dispute. And Azula proposes it because she knows the format favors her. She is, in her own assessment, the stronger fighter, and inside the bounds of a sanctioned duel, the stronger fighter is supposed to win. The smartest move Zuko makes in the entire fight is the one nobody talks about, which is that he agrees to it. He could have just attacked. He could have brought Katara into the fight from the start. The numbers are on his side. 2 against 1 is 2 against 1, even if one of them is the heir to the throne. Instead, he accepts the duel. He frames the fight, by accepting it, as a one-on-one match between the 2 children of the Fire Lord. He does this because he understands, in a way Azula does not, that the throne is going to need a story afterwards. If he wins by fighting fair, the Fire Nation will accept the result. If he wins by ganging up on her, even after the war is over, his rule will be contested forever. He is, in effect, performing a piece of political theater that he hopes will save his country a generation of civil unrest. The fact that he might lose, the fact that it is a riskier fight to take alone, is a price he is willing to pay. The intelligence here is the intelligence of somebody who has been raised inside a court and who understands that the long game is sometimes more important than the immediate victory. The fight itself, once it begins, is one of the most beautifully animated minutes of bending in the show. The animation team treats it as a piece of visual music, blue against orange, disciplined geometric movements against looser, more circular ones. The score is one of the most often praised pieces of music in the show, and the show has the wisdom to let the score do almost all of the dialogue. The 2 siblings barely speak, they fight. The show, by the way it stages the fight, lets you watch Azula's discipline slowly fracture. The blue flames, which have been a sign of her superiority for 2 seasons, start to look, on a careful watch, less precise than they used to be. She is breathing harder than the comet should require. Her stance, in the wide shots, is just a little less clean than the version of it you remember from earlier in the show. The breakdown that has been creeping up on her in private is, in this fight, starting to leak out of her control. Zuko, by contrast, is calmer than he has been in any fight in the series. He has had Iroh's training. He has had the months on the run with the gang. He has spent more time with himself than the prince at the start of the show could have tolerated. He is fighting the way Iroh would have fought, which is to say, with patience, with economy, with an awareness that fire is a finite resource, and that he should not spend it all in the first exchange. Azula, who has spent her life being praised for her efficiency, is the one who, in this fight, is bleeding energy. The show is telling you, by the way it animates the fight, that the brother who learned to slow down is now operating inside the sister's tempo, and the sister cannot quite keep up. Azula, recognizing at some level that she cannot win the duel inside the duel's rules, breaks the rules. The duel was a one-on-one. She turns to Katara, she fires lightning. The shot is, on every level, a betrayal. It is a betrayal of the format. It is a betrayal of her own pride. It is a betrayal of the version of herself that, throughout the series, would never have allowed herself to be seen losing the discipline of her own technique. The fact that she takes the shot is the show's confirmation that she has, in the months since taking the throne, lost the part of her mind that made her dangerous. The Azula at the height of her game would have won the duel cleanly, would have killed Zuko inside the rules, and would never have had to turn aside to a secondary target. The Azula in this fight is doing the desperate thing, and Zuko is the one who has the presence of mind to use it. His response is the moment the show has been training you for since Iroh's lesson on the ship. He sees the lightning leave his sister's hand. He throws himself in front of it. He does not have time to do the technique properly. He is too far from Katara. The angle is wrong, the breath is wrong, but he tries it anyway, because the alternative is letting Katara die, and that is not an alternative he is willing to accept. The lightning hits him. The redirection is incomplete. He survives, but the recovery is going to be long. The smart thing about this moment is that the show does not pretend the technique worked. It pretends the technique gave him a chance. Iroh's gift to him was not invulnerability. It was the chance to step in front of a bolt for somebody he loved and have a chance of surviving it. He took the chance. The chance held. What follows is the second great piece of intelligence in this fight, and it belongs to Katara. Zuko is on the ground, alive but seizing, with the lightning still working through him. Azula is loose in the courtyard, advancing on Katara, throwing fire wildly, no longer disciplined enough to land her shots cleanly. Katara cannot beat Azula in a direct exchange. The comet is still burning. Even a degraded Azula is, in raw bending terms, more powerful than Katara. So Katara does the same thing Toph would have done. She reads the room. She finds the water. She finds the grate. She finds the chain that the Fire Nation, in a moment of imperial decoration, has left embedded in the floor of its own throne court. And she uses all of it together, in a single fluid plan that takes maybe 30 seconds to execute, to freeze Azula's hands and feet to the grate with the water she pulled from the drain, while the chain, in her other hand, slips around her opponent's wrist and locks her in place. It is one of the most quietly beautiful pieces of fighting in the show, because it is not a display of power, it is a display of attention. Katara has been watching the courtyard the whole time the fight has been happening, even while Zuko was being electrocuted, and she has been planning what to do if she had to step in. By the time Azula is bound to the grate, the comet is still up, but Azula is done. The smart thing about Katara's plan is that it is, in form, the same kind of plan Sokka would have built. Use what you have, use the architecture of the room, use the materials your opponent has not thought to deny you. The lesson she got from Master Pakku, and the lesson she got from her years with Sokka and Toph, both come together in this single act of practical waterbending. The Fire Nation's own throne room is what defeats its princess. The fight ends with Azula screaming and weeping, bound to her own floor, while Katara turns to Zuko and pulls every last reserve of her healing onto him. The healing scene is short. It is also one of the most precise pieces of medical bending in the show. Katara is exhausted. She has nothing left. She uses what she has to keep his heart going. The lightning has already done its damage. The redirection bought him enough margin that she has something to save. She works on him. He breathes. He lives. The throne is, by the moral logic of the show, his. It is worth dwelling on what the show does with this scene, because it is, structurally, the inverse of the Day of Black Sun. The Day of Black Sun was the show's loud, ambitious plan that failed. The Final Agni Kai is the show's quiet, intimate plan that succeeds. It succeeds not because the heroes are stronger than the villain, but because they have built a wider model of the situation. Zuko understood the political stakes. Katara understood the spatial stakes. Azula, by contrast, was operating from a model that contained only herself and her opponent. The wider model wins, because the wider model can see further into the future of the next move. That is the show's argument about strategic intelligence in its most distilled form. The fighter who sees more of the room beats the fighter who only sees the other fighter. There is a coda, often missed, in the immediate aftermath. Zuko, when he wakes up, sees Azula still bound to the floor of the courtyard and does not order her killed. He does not order her exiled. He has her taken, with as much dignity as the situation allows, to a place where she can be treated. He is doing, in real time, what Iroh did with Ba Sing Se after the war ended. He is refusing to repeat the cycle of vengeance the Fire Nation has been built on. The fact that he extends mercy to the sister who almost murdered him is the moment the show, in my reading, is finally confident that the new Fire Lord will be a different kind of king. The smartest thing about Zuko's reign begins in that courtyard. Before he has even been formally crowned, he is choosing what to do with the people who lost the war, and his answer, from the first moment, is to refuse to do to them what they would have done to him. Across the world from the throne courtyard, Aang and Ozai are having a different kind of fight. The Comet's Day finale runs the two confrontations in parallel, cutting between them as the seasons close. Ozai, who has crowned himself the Phoenix King in a final piece of self-mythologizing, is in flight on a fleet of airships, intending to burn the Earth Kingdom to ash so that the new empire he plans to build can be built on empty ground. Aang has come to stop him. He has spent the back half of the season agonizing over whether he is going to have to kill the Fire Lord. The voices of his past lives have told him he must. He has refused to accept the binary. He has been hoping that the universe, in some form, would offer him a third way. The third way arrives, on screen, in the form of a lion turtle. The creature is one of the strangest and most beautiful images the show ever produces. It is a turtle the size of a city, with a forest growing on its back, ancient enough to have lived through the founding of bending itself. Aang encounters it not because he has sought it out, but because, having drifted alone on the open ocean, having been moving in a direction that even he could not fully explain, he washes up on its back. The lion turtle, in a voice that the show treats with the gravity of an old god, gives him a piece of teaching that contradicts everything every other character in the show has been teaching him about bending. It says in essence that before there were benders, the first humans learned to bend by bending their own energy, the energy of the self, and that the technique of energy bending has been preserved across the ages in case it should ever be needed again. The lion turtle teaches him the technique. He leaves. He goes to find Ozai. The show is honest about how this lands for some viewers. Energy bending is, by every measure, a deus ex machina. It is a new technique, introduced in the final episode, that solves the show's central moral problem, and it is taught to Aang by a creature he has never met before, off-screen, in a sequence that is shorter than most of the cabbage merchant's appearances. The criticism is fair. The show, in its haste to wrap, gives Aang a tool that you can argue he should have had to earn over a longer arc. The original creators have, over the years, given interviews acknowledging that the introduction was rushed, that they had hoped to have more episodes to set it up, and that the network's renewal pattern forced them to compress the resolution. What is also fair to say, though, is that the show has been arguing for energy bending, in spirit, for the entire run of the series. Every smart character, in every smart moment we have talked about tonight, has been an example of the same underlying claim. The claim is that the elements are not separate. The claim is that intelligence consists in finding the underlying material that other people have stopped looking for. Toph finds the earth inside metal. Iroh finds the water bending inside the fire bending. Katara, watching Hama, finds the water inside the human body. Sokka, watching the world, finds the patterns that the people in charge of the patterns have missed. The Mechanist, building gliders, finds the lift inside the air for a body that cannot bend it. The whole show, looked at from a certain angle, has been a long argument for the idea that the right way to handle an impossible situation is to look past the categories the situation has been organized by and see what is actually underneath. Energy bending, in that frame, is not a deus ex machina. It is the culmination of the show's thesis. Aang refuses the binary the universe presented him with. He goes looking for the third option. The universe rewards him by handing him a technique that operates one level below the level the conflict was being fought at. He cannot win at the level of fire against air. He can win at the level of spirit against spirit, by reaching into Ozai and stripping the fire out of him while leaving the man alive. The fight itself, when it happens, is staged as one of the most physically intense sequences in the show. Ozai, at the comet's height, is firing more energy than any other firebender has ever produced. Aang, in the Avatar state, is matching him blow for blow. The two of them, at one point, are essentially producing fire and air at storm scale, with the cliffs around them turning to glass, and the sky filled with smoke. And then Aang catches Ozai, and then he does the technique. The technique itself is one of the most carefully animated and scored sequences in the show. Aang's eyes go white. Ozai's eyes go white. The two of them are suspended in a moment that the show treats almost like a still photograph. The energies inside both bodies are visible, in a way the show rarely allows itself to make visible, and you watch the contest happen between two wills. The lion turtle has told Aang that energy bending is dangerous. It says that if the bender's will is not stronger than the will of the person they are unbending, the bender will be unbent themselves. Aang, who is 12, is wagering that he can hold his own will against the will of the most powerful man in the world. It is the most explicit version of the moral test the show has been giving him for 3 seasons. He does it. His will holds. Ozai's bending leaves him. The Phoenix King falls to the rocks, alive, powerless, undone. The animation team, in this sequence, deserves an enormous amount of credit, because the show is asking you to accept that something interior has been changed by something exterior, that a kind of moral and spiritual transaction has taken place that nobody on screen has any visible body language for. The way they solve this is to use light. Light flows out of one body and into the other. Light makes the energy visible. The light, by its color and direction, tells you what has been taken and what has been kept. It is a remarkable piece of design work. It is also, structurally, a callback to the moment when Aang first entered the Avatar state in the iceberg at the very beginning of the show. The same kind of glowing, the same kind of light streaming from the eyes, the same kind of feeling that the Avatar is, for a moment, more than one person. The show, by ending on this image, is closing a circle that began in the second minute of the first episode. The smart move here is not the technique. The smart move is that the show, by waiting until the very end to use this kind of imagery again, makes the imagery hit harder. You have been waiting for this look since the moment Aang opened his eyes in the ice. The show finally gives it to you, in service of a resolution that says, the Avatar's power is the power to give a man the chance to live, not the duty to take his life. There is a piece of context worth mentioning, because the show, by leaning into energy bending, leaves itself with an interesting problem inside its own canon. The technique, once introduced, has implications for everything that came before. If the elements are downstream of energy bending, then the whole structure of the four nations is downstream of an older, deeper unity. The show does not have time to explore this. The sequel series, Legend of Korra, and the comics that follow the original show both pick up some of these threads. Korra, in particular, has whole arcs that explore the origin of bending and the question of how the elements separated from the spirit world in the first place. Those later additions to the lore, including the figure of Wan as the first Avatar and the role of the lion turtles in granting bending, should be held with a different kind of weight than you hold the original series. Inside the original show, the only thing you know about energy bending is that it exists, that it is older than bending, that the lion turtles preserved it, and that Aang used it once. I want to close this stretch with a reading I find personally compelling, even though it is not the only one. The clever thing the show is doing, by withholding energy bending until the last possible moment, is making the case that the rarest form of intelligence is the kind that is not used. Aang could have learned this technique at any point in the show. The world was holding it for him. He had to refuse to use it. He had to refuse to learn it. He had to spend 3 seasons trying to be the kind of person he was taught to be, before he could earn the moment when an ancient creature would bother to teach him the deeper move. The show is, in that reading, arguing that the deepest forms of intelligence are gated by character, not by talent, and that the universe only shows them to people who are willing to do the work of being themselves first. That is a hard claim to make in any show, let alone a children's cartoon, and Avatar manages it without ever saying it out loud. The lion turtle is the show's silent thesis. In parallel with the events at the Royal Plaza and the cliffs above Wulong Forest, the show is running a third storyline that often gets less attention than it deserves. The Order of the White Lotus is the show's quietest piece of intelligence, because for most of the run, it has been hidden in plain sight, masquerading as a board game club for old men. The Order is the show's argument that institutions, properly built, can outlive any single regime, and that the smartest thing a generation of teachers can do, when they cannot stop a war, is to build a network that will survive the war and be ready to act when the moment arrives. The introduction is, in retrospect, one of the cleverest pieces of setup the show ever pulls. Iroh is seen, in the second book, repeatedly playing Pai Sho with strangers. The game is, on the surface, a quaint old game, played on a circular board with stylized tiles. Iroh plays it constantly. He loses, often. He insists on playing whenever he can. Most of the audience reads these scenes as character work, as a sign of Iroh's gentle nature, as a reminder that he is the kind of man who would rather sit at a table with a game than chase his nephew across the world. And then, in one specific scene, a stranger sits down across from him, plays a specific opening move, and Iroh responds with a specific second move, and the conversation that follows is not about the game at all. It is about a network. The Pai Sho board is, the show reveals in a single elegant beat, a recognition system. The Order of the White Lotus has been hiding inside the casual game for centuries. The opening move is a password. The second move is a countersign. Anybody who knows the protocol can be identified by anybody else who knows the protocol, in any tea house in any nation, without a word being spoken in plain language. The smartness of this design is the kind of smartness that real underground networks have actually used in real history. A recognition system that hides inside an ordinary social ritual, that has no overt symbols, that requires no secret handshakes, that can be performed in front of any number of uninvolved observers without raising suspicion, is the kind of system that the Fire Nation's secret police would have had a very hard time disrupting. You cannot ban a game without raising suspicion. You cannot watch every game in every tea house. The Order, by hiding inside the game, has effectively bought itself 100 years of secure communication in a hostile environment. The show treats this with the seriousness it deserves. The reveal of the White Lotus tile, which is the Order's actual symbol, is one of the small moments fans remember most fondly, because it makes you reevaluate every previous Pai Sho scene in the show. The membership, when the show eventually reveals it, is staggering. The Order, the show tells us, includes Iroh, the displaced heir of the Fire Nation throne. It includes Bumi, the Mad King of Omashu and one of the greatest earthbending masters in the world. It includes Pakku, the master of the Northern Water Tribe. It includes Zhong, a former Fire Nation general turned firebending dissident. It includes Piandao, the sword master who trained Sokka. These are not random old men. These are 5 of the most accomplished benders and warriors on the planet, and they have been quietly in correspondence with each other across enemy lines for decades. The Fire Nation, the most paranoid regime the world has known, has been infiltrated by an old men's tea society that includes its own former generals and princes. The show's quiet joke is that nobody in power noticed, because nobody in power thought to look at the people drinking tea. The Order's purpose, once the show reveals it, is twofold. The first is institutional. The Order is, in effect, the world's repository of bending and combat knowledge that the war was trying to destroy. Pakku, by being a member, has been preserving the northern waterbending tradition. Bumi has been preserving the older, deeper traditions of earthbending. Zhong has been preserving the older, deeper traditions of firebending. The Order is a kind of distributed library, holding the techniques the war would otherwise have erased, ready to teach them to the right student when the right student appears. Aang, the show is hinting, has been moving through a world full of Order members his entire journey. Some of the most important teachers he has had, Pakku and Bumi most obviously, were already affiliated with the Order before Aang ever met them. The chain of teaching that he has been benefiting from has been older than he knows. The second purpose is operational. When the comet arrives and the war reaches its final moment, the Order activates. It moves. Iroh leads a force, made up almost entirely of Order members and their allies, to retake Ba Sing Se from the Fire Nation occupation. This is the operation we touched on earlier when we were discussing Iroh. The thing to notice here is that the Order's military capacity, deployed in a single coordinated action, is sufficient to retake the largest city in the world from a force that has held it for almost a year. The 5 named members alone, fighting together, are essentially equivalent to a small army. Bumi, in his solo retaking of Omashu, demonstrates this earlier. The Order has been a sleeping force inside the world for the entire run of the show, and when it wakes, it changes the strategic picture in a single afternoon. It is worth slowing down here and thinking about what kind of intelligence this represents, because it is a kind we do not often see described in animated shows. The Order is a portrait of long-form, multi-generational, cross-national cooperation, organized around shared values rather than shared national identity. The members of the Order are loyal to each other across the borders the war has been built on. The Fire Nation General and the Water Tribe Master both treat each other as colleagues, because their professional respect for each other's discipline outweighs their nominal national loyalty. That, in itself, is one of the show's larger arguments. It is saying that the smartest people in the world tend to recognize each other across the lines that smaller people use to divide themselves, and that an effective resistance to a totalitarian regime is built, slowly, on those cross-border friendships. The show is honest, also, that the Order is a small organization. It is not a mass movement. It does not have, as far as we can see, an army of foot soldiers. It is a society of masters, each of whom is one of the most accomplished benders in his own discipline. The argument the show is making is not that resistance has to be popular to be effective. It is that resistance in a totalitarian environment is often best organized by small numbers of extremely skilled people who can act decisively at the right moment, rather than by a mass movement that can be infiltrated and broken. This is, depending on your view, a slightly conservative reading of how political change happens, or a deeply realistic one. The show does not pick a side. It just shows you that this particular form of organization worked, in this world, against this regime, at this moment. There is also, hidden inside the Order, a small but moving piece of writing about teaching. Each of the Order's members is, in his own way, a teacher. Iroh teaches Zuko, Pakku teaches Katara, Bumi teaches Aang, Piandao teaches Sokka, Zhong teaches Aang the basics of firebending before Aang is ready to handle them, and learns, through the consequences, why teaching matters. The Order is, in effect, the world's largest informal school. The argument the show is making is that the people who carry the techniques are also the people who decide who deserves to learn them, and that the choice of who to teach is itself a political act. The Order has been quietly making those choices, across generations, in a world that has been trying to destroy the people they would otherwise have taught. The fact that the resistance survives, the fact that the new generation has access to all the techniques the old generation knew, is the Order's quiet doing. They taught the right students. They kept the chain alive. Finally, the Order is the show's gift to anybody who has ever felt that the wisdom of older people in their own life was being underused. It is a long, slow argument that the people who have lived the longest, who have seen the most regimes, who have practiced their disciplines for the longest, are also the people who are most likely to know what to do when the comet finally arrives. The show, by introducing a network of old men who are also some of the most dangerous people on the planet, is making a small but quietly subversive case for the idea that maturity is itself a form of intelligence, and that a society that does not honor its teachers is, in the long run, going to lose its capacity to think. Avatar's quietest piece of world building might be the Order. It is certainly the one that lingers most after the credits roll. If we have spent most of the night talking about the smart things people inside the show do, it is worth ending on the smart things the show itself does, because much of what makes Avatar feel as durable as it does is the structural intelligence underneath all of the individual moments. The series was made by a small team at Nickelodeon between roughly the middle of the 2000s and the end of 2008, under the supervision of its creators Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, with a writer's room that included a small number of people who went on to do significant work elsewhere, including the head writer Aaron Ehas. Inside that production environment, the team did several things that, on a careful watch, reveal themselves to have been planned much further in advance than the surface suggests. The first piece of structural intelligence is the use of seeded payoffs. Lines and images that appear casually in early episodes turn out to be load-bearing in later ones. The most obvious example is Iroh's Pai Sho board, which we have already discussed, but the pattern repeats throughout. Master Piandao, when he tests Sokka in the third book, is also revealed to be a member of the White Lotus. Aang's encounter with a giant spirit in the first book turns out to set up his ability to enter the spirit world later. The dragons that Zuko and Aang meet in the third book, who teach them the original meaning of firebending, are seeded by Iroh's stories about hunting dragons as a young man, which the show quietly reveals he never actually killed. The single line of dialogue Iroh gives, much earlier in the show, about how the dragons were special, becomes the entire foundation for the Dragon Dance episode much later. The show is, in effect, writing its own setups for 2 seasons before it pays them off. Most television, even good television, has to invent its setups in the season they are paid off. Avatar planned ahead. The second piece of structural intelligence is the use of doubled scenes. Many of the most important emotional beats in the show happen twice. There is an early episode in which Zuko sails on his ship, alone with Iroh, and you watch him struggle with his exile. There is a later episode in which Zuko sails on a stolen Fire Nation ship, alone with Iroh again, and the doubling makes the difference between the 2 scenes visible. The boy has grown. The man with him has grown too. The audience is invited to compare the two without being told to compare them. The same pattern shows up with Katara and Aang, who have an early conversation in the first book about whether Aang is going to be ready for the war, and a much later conversation in the third book about the same question. The early conversation is hopeful. The later conversation is heavier. The show is using the doubling to give you a measure of the cost of the journey. The third piece of structural intelligence is the writing of villains. The show has, across its run, several different antagonists, and the choice of which one is foregrounded at any given time is itself part of the design. The first book centers Zhao, an ambitious but reckless admiral whose intelligence is offset by his ego. The second book centers Long Feng, a bureaucrat whose intelligence is concentrated in his ability to manage the institutions of Ba Sing Se. The third book centers Azula and Ozai. Each villain demonstrates a different way that intelligence can be misused. Zhao misuses it for personal ambition. Long Feng misuses it to keep a city ignorant. Azula misuses it to manipulate. Ozai misuses it to dominate. The show is, in effect, walking you through a small typology of intelligent evil, and by the end of the show you have a more nuanced sense of how power corrupts thought than most adult dramas manage to deliver. The fourth piece of structural intelligence is the willingness to let episodes be small. Some of the most quietly loved episodes in the show are the ones in which essentially nothing happens. The Tales of Ba Sing Se, which we touched on earlier, gives you a series of small vignettes inside the city, including the Iroh episode. The beach gives you the 4 young Fire Nation friends, Azula and Zuko and Mai and Ty Lee, on holiday at a coastal house, learning unpleasant things about themselves while trying and failing to relax. The Ember Island Players, near the end of the 3rd book, gives you the entire gang watching a stage adaptation of their own adventures, performed badly, by actors who do not know what really happened. None of these episodes advance the war plot. All of them deepen the characters. The willingness of the show to spend time on this kind of material, in a season order that was always under pressure from the network for action and adventure, is itself a piece of structural intelligence. The show knew that you could not love the characters if you only ever saw them in fight scenes, and it carved out the room for the love to grow. The 5th piece of structural intelligence is the way the show handles its own ending. Most action shows of the era ended with a single climactic battle and a brief epilogue. Avatar ended with a 4-part finale, in which all of the threads come together. The war is decided in 3 simultaneous fights, and the resolution is followed by a long, slow denouement that gives the major relationships room to breathe. The denouement includes Zuko's coronation, Iroh's tea shop reopening, the reconciliation of the children with each other, and the establishment of the new world's shape. The show takes its time. It honors the friendships that have carried us through. It lets the audience sit for a few minutes with what has just happened before sending us out. That is, on its own, a piece of writing wisdom that a lot of much more expensive shows have failed to manage in the years since. The 6th piece of structural intelligence, and the one to land this section on, is the way the show treats the relationship between its 3 protagonists in the original trio and the broader cast they accumulate. Aang, Katara, and Sokka start the show alone. By the end, they are part of a larger family that includes Toph and Zuko and Suki, and beyond that, a web of allies that includes Iroh, the Mechanist and Teo, the Kyoshi warriors, Master Pakku, Master Bumi, Master Piandao, Hakoda, Bato, and dozens of others. The show, by the way it accumulates this cast, is making a quiet argument about how communities are built. Communities are not assembled in one fight. They are accreted slowly, through repeated small acts of choosing to trust people whose backgrounds and skills and allegiances are different from your own. By the time the comet arrives, the gang has effectively become a small society in itself, with its own internal economy of skills, its own division of labor, its own debates, its own grievances, its own way of making decisions. That, the show is arguing, is what the world should look like after the war. The smartest thing the show ever does is to demonstrate, by the structure of its own cast list, what the post-war world is supposed to feel like. It is not a single nation winning. It is a coalition of nations sitting down together. Avatar is, in that sense, not just a war story. It is a quiet rehearsal of what comes after war. There is one more piece of context worth including, and it is honest about the production. The original creators have said in interviews that the show came under significant network pressure in its later stages, that the schedule for the 3rd book was tight, and that several episodes that they would have liked to make were either cut, compressed, or pushed into the comic continuation that picked up the story after the show ended. Some of the awkwardness around Energybending, around the speed of Azula's collapse, and around some of the secondary character arcs in the 3rd book is, by the creator's own account, a result of having to fit more story into less screen time than they had hoped. The fact that the show works as well as it does, given those constraints, is itself a testament to how strong the underlying structure was. A weaker show would have collapsed under the same compression. Avatar bent but did not break. Before we close, it is worth circling back to Zuko, because we have been talking around him all night, and he deserves a section of his own. Zuko is, in a real sense, the engine of the show's entire argument about intelligence, because Zuko is the character who has to do the hardest piece of thinking that any character in the show is asked to do. He has to think his way out of the worldview he was raised in. He has to do it without help for most of the show, in a world that is actively trying to keep him inside the worldview, while being chased by the people who want him dead and chased again, in a different way, by the people who want him obedient. He has to do this thinking while wounded, while exiled, while ashamed. And he has to do it without having, for most of the show, any of the language he would need to describe the change he is going through. He has to invent the description as he goes. The intelligence of Zuko's arc is not the intelligence of a single brilliant moment. It is the intelligence of a long, slow inventory. He has to look at every belief he has been handed and ask, is this mine? Is this true? Did I take this on because I was taught it, or because I saw it for myself? He has to do this with his understanding of his father. He has to do this with his understanding of his sister. He has to do this with his understanding of his uncle, his nation, his enemy, his own face in the mirror. The scar his father gave him is, in the simplest reading, a reminder of his pain. In the deeper reading, the show is letting it function as the thing that keeps him from being able to lie to himself. He carries the wound. He cannot pretend, in any quiet moment, that he was not the boy who once trusted that he could speak truthfully to his father and was burned for trying. The most decisive single act Zuko performs in the show is the speech he gives his father during the Day of Black Sun, the one we touched on briefly earlier. It is not a fight, it is not a piece of bending, it is a speech in which he lays out, with as much clarity as he can manage, that everything his father taught him about the Fire Nation was a lie, that the war was unjust, that he is going to leave to join the Avatar, and that he understands he will be hunted for it. The speech is short. The intelligence is in the fact that he can give it at all. He has had to think for 2 seasons his way to a place where the speech becomes possible. He has had to undo, one belief at a time, the entire architecture of identity that his upbringing built into him. The fact that he can stand in front of his father during the only window in a century when his father cannot firebend and say these things out loud is the result of years of internal labor. The show is making the argument that political change starts with this kind of labor, that you cannot defect from a regime until you have defected from its way of thinking, and that the defection is the harder piece of work. The other small piece of Zuko intelligence to credit is the way he navigates his arrival at the gang. He does not show up and demand to be trusted. He shows up and accepts that he has to earn each of the 4 kids' beliefs separately, on their terms, in their own time. He follows Aang first, because Aang is the most willing to forgive. He works his way through Sokka by helping him on the Boiling Rock mission. He works his way through Toph by getting injured, saving her life. He works his way through Katara last, because Katara has the most reason to distrust him, and his earning of her trust includes the most painful piece of writing in the back half of the show, in which he helps her track down the soldier who killed her mother. He does not push her to forgive him. He does not push her to forgive the soldier. He simply stands with her while she makes the decisions she has to make. By the end of the episode, she has not forgiven the soldier and has, in some quiet sense, decided to forgive Zuko. The intelligence of his approach is the intelligence of somebody who understands that trust is granted, not demanded, and that the people you have hurt are the ones who get to decide when, if ever, the hurt is over. The other character whose intelligence to credit briefly, before the outro, is Bumi, because his style is one that has been running underneath all of this and we have not given him much room. Bumi is, when you meet him, presented as a mad old earthbending king who is, in the words of the show, 112 years old. He cackles, he stares, he demands that Aang perform impossible tasks before he will help. He is, on first viewing, a comic figure. The smart thing about Bumi, which the show reveals slowly, is that the eccentricity is a disguise. He has spent his life developing a doctrine of bending he calls neutral jing, the idea that the smartest move in any situation is, often, to do nothing, to wait, to listen, to let the situation reveal itself. He has applied this doctrine to his own city. When the Fire Nation occupied Omashu, Bumi did not resist. He did not fight. He allowed himself to be imprisoned. He waited. He waited, the show tells us, for the right moment. And when the Day of Black Sun arrived, that right moment came, and Bumi, alone, in a metal coffin that was supposed to hold him forever, broke himself free and retook his city without help. The point, for tonight, is that Bumi is the show's most concentrated example of the idea that intelligence is sometimes patience, and that the most insightful old man in the world is sometimes the one who looks the most ridiculous because he is no longer using up energy on impressing anybody. There are, also, dozens of smaller smart moments scattered across the show that we have not had time to properly cover. The way Suki organizes the Kyoshi warriors as a fighting force. The way Jet, the morally compromised young earthbender resistance leader, executes one of the most efficient guerrilla operations in the show before Sokka and Katara work out that his methods cross a line they cannot accept. The way Hakoda, Sokka's father, runs the navy of the Southern Water Tribe with a quiet professionalism that the show keeps showing you in glimpses. The way Master Paku, even after he has been beaten by Katara and changed his mind, manages the transition to teaching female students without giving the impression that he has had to be dragged. The way the Air Nomad temples, in their physical layouts, are designed around the ways their people actually lived and worked, a piece of architectural world building the show only makes obvious once you have spent time inside more than one of them. The way the comics, which we have only touched on briefly tonight, continue to develop the political consequences of the war's end, including the contested status of the Fire Nation colonies that became, in the comics canon, the eventual republic that Korra inherits. None of these are central enough to have been a chapter tonight. All of them are part of the larger fabric of intelligence the show is weaving. The most resonant moment in the show, in the end, might not be any of the ones we have actually talked about. It might just be the moment when the show, having walked you through a war and an exile and a coronation and a tea shop and a network of old men and a girl in a metal box, ends with the children sitting on a balcony, watching the sun set over a city that is no longer at war, and lets you sit with them for a few minutes in silence. That kind of restraint is itself a kind of intelligence. The show, having made every argument it wanted to make, knows when to stop talking and let you breathe. The lesson it leaves you with is, in the end, a quiet one. The smartest thing a person can do, in a world that has been at war for 100 years, is to keep being patient, keep being curious, keep being willing to learn from the people the world told you not to learn from, and keep being kind to the people who have not yet figured out how to be kind back. That is, more or less, the whole moral of Avatar. The show takes 3 seasons to teach it. It teaches it well. It is strange, when you sit with it for a while, how a single animated show, made on a children's network with a tight budget and a small writer's room, has managed to stay this central to the cultural conversation almost 20 years after its first episode aired. There are very few pieces of children's television from that era that anybody is still talking about. Avatar, by contrast, keeps growing. New viewers find it through the streaming services every year. Old viewers come back to it during hard months in their lives and find that it still does what it used to do. The fan communities online keep producing new readings of old scenes, new theories about the corners of the world the show only sketched, new affection for the characters that has lasted longer than most marriages. There is something about the show that, the more you press on it, the more it gives back. Part of that, I think, is what we have spent tonight on. The show is genuinely smart, and the smartness is not the kind that goes out of date. The arguments it is making about teaching, about patience, about kindness as a discipline, about the way intelligence can rot when it is fed only ambition, are arguments that the world keeps producing fresh occasions to remember. Every generation that comes to Avatar finds, in the show's careful construction, a quiet defense of the kind of thinking that the world around it is usually trying to discourage. The show keeps insisting, in small ways and large, that the answer to a hard situation is not to harden but to widen, to look further, to listen more carefully, to find the third option. That is, for most of us, a thing we need to be reminded of more often than we would like to admit. The other part of why it lasts, I suspect, is that the show was made by people who loved it. You can feel that in the calligraphy on the walls, in the choreography of the fights, in the way the score swells at the moments that matter and stays back at the ones that do not, in the small grace notes hidden in episodes that did not have to have them. The show is a piece of craft made by a team that cared. That is the thing, in the end, that nothing else can fake. So if you are still awake, or only half awake, I hope this has been good company. If you have drifted off somewhere around the 3rd hour, I hope it was the kind of company that let you drift. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.